Hey guys, tonight we begin with the life as a companion of Leonardo da Vinci. A world not of golden halls or grand unveilings, but of smudged ink-stained fingers. Hours spent chasing his unfinished ideas, and long days spent waiting while he stared silently at a blank wall. Far from the dazzling genius seen in portraits, it was a life of hauling pigment jars, mixing paint that refused to stick, and sleeping beneath shelves stacked high with half-forgotten scrolls. So, while you're getting comfortable, feel free to tap like and subscribe if this kind of calm, late-night history is your thing. And I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment with your city and what time it was when you pressed play. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning inside Leonardo da Vinci's workshop doesn't exactly begin with a bell or a rooster's crow. Instead, it stretches into existence like paint drying on a damp fresco, slow, uncertain, and marked by silence. You stand barefoot on cold flagstone, the kind that leaches warmth from your feet, no matter how long you've been standing there. The sky beyond the narrow shutters still carries that heavy gray blue of very early morning. Not quite night and not yet day, while inside the studio, everything rests in a quiet sort of waiting. The air smells of old wood, linseed oil, faint traces of candle smoke, and something sharper. One of Leonardo's mixtures, perhaps, the ones he claims will preserve paints longer or ward off illness. Though you've never entirely believed either. The thing is, nobody in this place knows when Leonardo wakes up. That includes you. It's not a question of dawn or schedules. Leonardo's sleep follows its own logic, something between a catnap and a philosopher's meditation. You've seen him drift off standing up, brush still in hand. You've seen him rise at midnight, sketch furiously by candlelight, then vanish back into sleep as if someone had simply paused him like a moving statue. Your task is simple and frustrating. Be ready when he wakes. There's no way to predict it. No gentle knock, no morning bell. Just the rustle of paper, or the creak of that rough plank he insists on using as a bed. For now, you keep yourself occupied. Slowly, quietly, you straighten things around the studio. There's a row of brushes on the table, each one with bristles stained in layers of color that defy easy description. Somewhere between rust red and a blue that looks like storm clouds at dusk. You handle them with care, laying them out like tiny sleeping animals. The table itself is cluttered with more than paint. Scraps of paper with half-finished designs, bits of metal, gears, odd bits of string and wax. You'd need a week just to catalog what's here, and by then, Leonardo would have filled another table with even stranger objects. Off to one side, there's a small, furry presence tucked beneath the benches. A cat. Nobody owns it. It showed up one rainy afternoon and hasn't left since. You suppose it fits the atmosphere here. A mix of genius, disorder, and things that drift in and stay simply because no one tells them otherwise. The cat's tail flicks lazily as it sleeps among a scattering of papers that, given Leonardo's habits, might hold sketches worth more than some people's entire homes. Once or twice, you glance toward the corner where Leonardo sleeps, or might be sleeping. His bed is nothing like a noble's grand four-poster. It's a plank of wood with a thin mattress, draped with blankets that slide halfway to the floor. If he's there, he's likely curled on his side, papers tangled around him, charcoal smudges on his fingertips even in sleep. You know better than to disturb him. There's an unspoken rule here. Never wake Leonardo unless there's fire or flood, and even then, think twice. The last time someone made that mistake, Leonardo had opened his eyes mid-dream and spent the next hour describing a self-winding clock that brewed coffee, which might have been brilliant had it not made absolutely no sense. So instead of waking him, you wait. You lean against the table, careful not to bump any glass jars. You listen. Outside, Florence begins to stir, a distant echo of hooves on cobblestones, merchants shouting about fresh olives, and the occasional church bell, marking an hour you don't bother counting anymore. Inside, it's a world unto itself. Oil paints thick in the air, paper rustling faintly where a draft slips through unseen cracks, and the occasional pop from a cooling candle wick. You allow yourself to sit for a moment, perched on a stool by the window. Your eyes grow heavy in the half-light. It's not quite sleep, more of a drifting. The kind that settles in when there's nothing urgent to do, but no reason to leave. This half-sleep feels oddly fitting in a place like this, where days stretch and fold around Leonardo's whims. If he rises soon, you'll be ready. If not, there's always more to organize, more brushes to clean, more pigment dust to wipe from the floor. A soft sound draws your attention. You open your eyes, expecting footsteps, but it's only the cat again, paws pressing against a pile of discarded sketches. You stand and gently shoo it away, mindful not to crease or tear anything. It's a strange thing to live like this, orbiting around a man whose mind moves faster than most can follow. One moment, you're wiping dust off a sheet of meaningless scribbles, and the next, you realize those same scribbles describe something the world has never seen before. A flying machine, a fortress layout, a new way to layer colors. And then, almost like clockwork, there's a change in the air, a rustle of blankets, a slow, deliberate yawn. You turn, standing up straight as Leonardo himself sits up on his plank bed. His hair, always a bit wild, sticks out in soft, disheveled waves. His eyes open just enough to catch the light, and for a moment, he doesn't look like a genius, just another tired man waking up in a cold room. He murmurs something low and gravelly. "You're still here." You nod. Of course. Leonardo doesn't need more words. He swings his legs off the bed, barefoot on the flagstones without flinching. His first instinct isn't food or drink. It's charcoal. He picks up a stick from the table, sketching an invisible line in the air before pressing it to the wall beside his bed. No hesitation, no warm-up. A line becomes a curve. A curve becomes a wing or a wheel, or the beginning of some unknown device. You watch him from a respectful distance, fetching brushes when he gestures, pouring a little water into the clay bowl for mixing paints. The cat winds around his ankles like it's part of the process. This, you realize once again, is how your days will unfold. Waiting, fetching, following. Sleep when he sleeps. Work when he works. There's no clock here, only the quiet pulse of creation, stretching long past reason or rest. And as you step softly across the room to ready the next set of supplies, you can't help wondering, just faintly, what it would be like to have a normal morning. One where waking up meant bread and warmth instead of cold stone and charcoal dust. But then again, there are worse fates than standing quietly in the orbit of a man who might just change the world. The hours following Leonardo's first waking moments unfold in a pattern that never quite feels like a pattern. One minute, he's deep in sketching some quietly magnificent thing, lines so clean they seem too perfect for human hands. And the next, he abandons it completely, moving on as though the previous idea never existed. You've learned to expect this. Today, he starts with brushes in hand, the remnants of last night's oil paints still fresh, and within the span of a breath, he's talking about bird wings instead of portrait shading. You follow, always following. It isn't just your job. It's survival in this place. One day he's a painter, the next day, a sculptor. By evening, an anatomist, an architect, or some combination of all these things. The workshop stretches to fit his moods, cluttered with canvases, wooden models, dissected bird wings, gears, pulleys, and scrolls scattered across every surface. At first, when you'd taken this position, you'd thought it would be simple. Fetch brushes, grind pigments, maybe clean up. You'd pictured standing in the cool quiet of a Renaissance studio, assisting with grand works meant for noble halls. The truth? It's more like chasing storms. This morning begins with colors. Leonardo, still barefoot, stands by the tall window sketching designs for a grand mural that may or may not ever get finished. He mutters about lapis lazuli, how the blue pigment needs to be ground finer, how the merchants try to cheat him. You begin mixing it in a small stone bowl, using a tool worn smooth by endless use. The powder is vibrant, startling even. But before you can finish, he's across the room, pulling a dusty codex from the shelf. "I need the notes," he says sharply, already flipping through pages. You set the bowl down and come over, squinting at dense lines of mirror-written Italian, his usual habit, writing backward to confound nosy rivals. The notes are for a flying machine this time, a model shaped like a bat's wing. He'd started it weeks ago, maybe months, but now, today, it's urgent. He demands paper, fresh quills, hot wax to seal sketches. You scramble to provide all of it, while trying not to trip over the last unfinished sculpture left in the center of the room. A marble torso still half-formed, streaked with chalk and dust. By midday, the project has shifted again. From flying machines, Leonardo's mind drifts into anatomy. He clears a table, pushing paints and brushes aside without a second thought, laying out parchment and ink. You fetch clean paper while he speaks almost to himself, words tumbling faster than you can follow. Now it's about tendons, the way muscles stretch along bone. He's describing human shoulder blades while gesturing with a brush like it's a conductor's baton. And here's where things get difficult. Because sometimes these anatomical studies aren't based only on theory. You glance toward the corner where a large cloth covers something you'd rather not think too hard about. Leonardo has permission from the authorities. Anatomical dissection for the sake of art and science. But permission doesn't make it any less unsettling. You try to focus on your tasks instead. Preparing parchment, heating wax, making sure the workshop has enough clean quills and enough wine to keep Leonardo's attention steady. It doesn't matter that you started your morning mixing lapis lazuli. That's forgotten now. Tomorrow it might be something else entirely. And if he isn't drawing or building, he's pacing. Leonardo paces like a man being chased by his own thoughts. Back and forth across the workshop's length, occasionally grabbing a passing assistant, sometimes you, sometimes someone else, to ramble about proportional ratios or fluid mechanics. You've learned to nod and make encouraging noises, even when you have no idea what he means. There's one moment that stands out, halfway through the afternoon, when he stops pacing and stares at a simple wooden box on the workbench. A gear mechanism sits inside, half-built. It's dusty, forgotten. And yet now, today, it catches his attention again. With barely a word, he starts fiddling with it. You're pulled into it immediately, holding tools, adjusting weights, running to fetch additional pieces from the storeroom. The gear clicks once, twice, then jams. Leonardo frowns, murmuring something about friction and balance. It doesn't matter that there are half-finished paintings drying behind him. Today, at this hour, this little gear machine is the most important thing in the world. You've come to understand this as the true heart of Leonardo's genius. Not just his paintings or sculptures, but this relentless, restless movement between ideas. It's exhausting, and yet, strangely, you wouldn't trade it for anything quieter. By the time evening shadows stretch long across the workshop floor, there's evidence of a dozen different projects in progress. Papers with diagrams of pulley systems sit beside anatomical sketches. A small clay model of a fortress wall rests next to sheets of delicate color studies meant for some noble's portrait. Half of it will be forgotten tomorrow. The other half might change history. You begin tidying up, not because Leonardo asked, but because if you don't, the place will collapse under its own weight. Brushes must be washed. Tools must be wiped clean. Papers must be stacked in some order, even if Leonardo will shuffle them again by morning. Somewhere in the middle of this quiet, repetitive work, you pause. There's an unfinished drawing resting against the far wall. A figure with wings. Not quite human, not quite machine. You wonder, not for the first time, whether Leonardo will ever actually build it, whether his endless shifting between projects means that some of his greatest ideas will remain only lines on paper. Historians might ask that someday, centuries from now. Why didn't he finish more? Why did he leave so many things half-built, half-painted, half-dreamed? But standing here, in the middle of his world, you already know. It isn't about finishing. It's about the chase. And tonight, like every night, you follow. Morning blends into midday, and midday blends into something quieter, slower, as the sun tips westward over Florence's red-tiled rooftops. Leonardo's workshop is quiet now, not because the day's work is ended, but because you've been sent out on yet another errand. This is as much a part of your life as mixing pigments or fetching brushes. The eternal search for materials never really stops. Whether it's rare minerals, specific kinds of wood, or the kind of oddly shaped glass vessel only one apothecary in town seems to stock, you spend a remarkable amount of time simply tracking down whatever strange thing Leonardo needs next. Today it's lapis lazuli dust and stretched vellum, a familiar combination. Leonardo refuses to use inferior blue pigments, which means the expensive stuff. Genuine lapis, ground fine as flour. And as for the vellum, it has to be flawless, no rough spots, no discoloration. Anything less, and it'll go straight into the reject pile. You step out into the street with a list scrawled in Leonardo's backward script. Thankfully, you've learned how to read it. Your fingers trace the shapes automatically now, even as your eyes adjust to the sudden brightness outside. Florence bustles around you. The smell of baking bread and roasting chestnuts drifts past from nearby stalls. Merchants shout to one another, hawking silks and spices. Horse-drawn carts rattle over cobblestones. And in the middle of it all, you weave through the crowds, the folded parchment of Leonardo's list tucked into your sleeve, one hand gripping the worn strap of your pouch. The first stop is the pigment cellar. It's always a delicate negotiation. Lapis lazuli isn't cheap, and if the merchant suspects you're buying for Leonardo da Vinci himself, the price will double before you can blink. You approach the small, shaded stall with deliberate calm, pretending indifference as you examine little glass jars lined in rows. The merchant eyes you warily. "Looking for blue?" he asks. You nod, careful not to reveal too much. The fine kind, ground well. The man gestures toward a sealed jar near the back. You recognize the weight and shimmer even before opening it. Real lapis. No tricks this time. You haggle anyway, lowering your voice, letting a few silver coins jingle in your hand to suggest just enough authority. Not too much, not too little. When the deal is made, you slip the jar into your pouch with care. One wrong step could crack the glass, waste a fortune in powder. You've done that once before. Never again. Next is the parchment. You wind through the narrow alleys near the wool dyer's district, passing buildings streaked with years of smoke and sun. Vellum sellers keep to quieter streets, their goods too delicate for the bustle of market squares. You duck into a small shop, where the walls are lined with folded sheets in every shade, from creamy white to faint gold. Behind the counter, a quiet man in a brown robe looks up from trimming a piece of parchment with a silver blade. "I need the finest," you tell him, voice low. "No blemishes, for sketches." He doesn't ask questions. These days, most people know when someone's buying for Leonardo. Or if they don't, they pretend not to. The sheets he brings out are thin as a whisper, smooth as polished stone. You inspect each one carefully, checking for tiny imperfections. A single spot or wrinkle would ruin the flow of ink under Leonardo's hand. Once satisfied, you roll them gently and add them to your pouch. By now, the sun's climbing lower, shadows stretching long through the alleyways. But there's still more to find. Today's list also calls for a specific kind of thin wire, probably for one of Leonardo's models or machines, and a handful of obscure herbs. The wire is simple enough. There's a smith near the Arno River who keeps a side stock of specialty metals. You slip through the smithy's smoky doorway, greeted by the hiss of steam and the sharp scent of hot iron. The herbs, though, those are trickier. Leonardo's experiments require things not always found in clean, orderly apothecaries. Sometimes you're looking for roots that smell like damp earth, sometimes for powders that stain your fingers yellow. There's one woman in particular, an older herbalist tucked into a shadowed corner near Santa Croce, who keeps what Leonardo prefers. Her stall is half hidden by draped cloths, smelling of rosemary and things less easy to name. "What is it this time?" she asks, not looking up as you approach. You recite the list from memory: calamus root, myrrh resin, a touch of indigo powder that isn't quite the same as lapis, but still finds its way into Leonardo's mixtures. She measures each with care, her fingers moving like a weaver's shuttle, precise and deliberate. As you watch her work, you can't help but think about all the quiet hands behind the grand names. People like this herbalist, the smith, the parchment maker, none of them appear in the history books. But without them, without all these tiny transactions, there would be no masterpieces hanging in grand halls. No flying machines sketched out in fine vellum. No towering murals brought to life. By the time you're finished, your pouch is heavy with supplies, and your legs ache from walking. Florence's streets begin to cool as dusk sets in. Lanterns flicker to life in the doorways. You make your way back toward the workshop, weaving through familiar turns. And as you walk, a quiet thought settles in. Even with all this effort, all these errands, tomorrow's list will be different. Leonardo's needs shift like the wind. Today it was lapis, vellum, wire, and herbs. Tomorrow, it might be something stranger: glass spheres, odd stones, maybe even pieces of discarded armor. That's the shape of things around Leonardo. A constant, relentless hunt for the exact right materials. The kind of work that never makes it into paintings or records. No noble will ever commission a fresco celebrating the man sent out to buy pigment dust. But still, it matters. When you finally step back through the heavy door of the workshop, the familiar scent of oil paint and candle wax washes over you. Leonardo is exactly where you left him, standing over a table strewn with sketches, lost in thought. He glances up as you enter, eyes flickering toward the pouch in your hand. "Did you find it?" he asks simply. You nod, unpacking each item carefully, laying them out in neat rows. The lapis jar, the parchment roll, the bundle of herbs wrapped tight in linen. Leonardo leans over each, inspecting with the same quiet intensity he gives to everything else. "Good," he murmurs, already reaching for a brush. "Very good. And just like that, you're part of the cycle again. Tomorrow, another list, another hunt. The eternal search continues, not just for materials, but for whatever piece of the world Leonardo means to capture next." Evenings in Leonardo's workshop rarely unfold with quiet predictability. There is no hour when everything is cleaned and tucked away, no comforting end-of-day ritual like in an ordinary household. Instead, dusk usually signals the start of yet another round of restless tinkering, projects pulled from dusty corners, half-forgotten ideas resurrected, and unfortunately for you, the occasional terrible smell creeping through the walls and floorboards like some ghostly warning of what lies beyond the main room. That smell, specifically, is something you've come to dread in a way that goes beyond simple discomfort. It's the sharp, cloying tang of oil mixed with spoiled substances, the faint rot of animal parts kept for too long in jars, or worse, anatomical studies left where they shouldn't have been. The workshop is cluttered with the tools of 1,000 trades: brushes, gears, inks, plaster molds, but it's also cluttered with Leonardo's more unsettling interests, particularly in anatomy and natural sciences. And that, unfortunately, means there are always things quietly decaying somewhere, just out of sight. It usually starts the same way. You're working late, tidying up pigments or sorting through sketches, when suddenly you catch it. A faint, sharp note in the air that wasn't there an hour ago. You pause, sniffing quietly, trying to decide if it's something harmless, overheated oil, perhaps, or if it's one of those smells. The kind that curls into the back of your throat and doesn't leave for hours. You glance toward the far end of the workshop, where Leonardo keeps his anatomy notes and experiments. That's always where the danger lies. There are tables over there you try not to get too close to. Some are covered with neat cloths, others with nothing at all, revealing wax-sealed jars filled with liquids that range from cloudy yellow to inky black. Floating inside, half hidden by rippling reflections, might be animal organs or carefully preserved specimens, frogs, birds, once even a small monkey, all collected in the name of understanding how things work. Muscles, tendons, wings, bones. Leonardo insists on studying them himself, not trusting second-hand reports. And while the scholars of Florence admire the results, those clean, perfect anatomical sketches, you're the one left opening windows in the middle of the night to let the air clear. Tonight is no exception. Leonardo is absorbed in sketching a diagram for a new bridge design, seemingly oblivious to the creeping smell building in the corner of the room. You, however, are not. You set down the brush you'd been cleaning, moving toward the windows to push open the shutters just a crack. Cool evening air slips in, carrying the faint sounds of the city settling down for the night. Distant footsteps, the clink of a wine jug, quiet laughter from a tavern nearby. All of it feels impossibly normal compared to the private little world you're standing in now. You check each covered table, moving slowly, careful not to bump anything. Once, early on, you'd knocked over a jar you thought was empty. It wasn't. It had been sealed with wax, holding what you later learned was a carefully dissected bird heart. The memory still makes your stomach twist. Tonight, though, it isn't a jar. It's something tucked beneath a cloth, a larger shape, and judging by the strength of the smell, whatever preservation technique Leonardo used hasn't quite held. You pull back the cloth only slightly, just enough to confirm what it is. An animal specimen, perhaps from the market, perhaps something brought in from one of his more adventurous assistants. It's already starting to turn. You cover it again immediately, pressing the fabric tight and weighing it down with a loose slab of marble. Out of sight doesn't always mean out of mind, but it's a start. Leonardo finally notices, glancing up from his work, as you move through the room opening more windows. His brow furrows. Something? He asks, voice absent, already half returning to his diagrams. You hesitate before answering. One of the specimens, master. It's past its time. Leonardo hums in acknowledgement, not stopping his sketching for even a moment. Yes, that happens. It happens, that's all he says. You bite down on a sigh, reaching instead for one of the scented oil lamps kept on a shelf for exactly this reason. They don't quite cover the worst of it, but they help. You light the wick, letting warm notes of rosemary and lavender fill the air, chasing back at least some of the sharper edges of rot and old chemicals. There's a kind of grim humor in it all. People outside these walls would imagine Da Vinci's studio as a place of pure beauty, canvases and sculptures, light streaming through perfect windows, the scent of fresh paint and marble dust. But the truth is far more tangled. Behind every graceful sketch of a mussel or bird wing lies the smell of failed preservation, of materials turned sour, of the less glamorous realities of learning how things work. You think back to something Leonardo once said, not to you specifically, but to the room as a whole, while fiddling with a wax model of an eyeball. He'd said, to understand nature, you must embrace even its decay. You suppose this is what he meant, though embracing it and surviving it feel like two very different things some nights. Still, you keep moving, dousing claws with scented water, airing out fabrics, shifting jars into cooler corners where the heat of the day can't touch them as easily. It's all part of the routine, no? Quiet, methodical. You imagine some future historian, centuries from now, studying one of Leonardo's notebooks and wondering how these perfect, clean pages ever came into being. How little they'll guess about the smells, the midnight airings, the half-rotted things quietly wrapped in linen behind the grand paintings. As the hours stretch on, the air clears slightly. Leonardo continues working, unmoved by it all, brush flicking lightly over paper as though nothing unusual had ever happened. You finish your quiet circuit of the room and finally allow yourself to sit down by the window, the cat from earlier curling up beside your foot, unbothered as always. And as you sit there, staring out at the flickering torches of Florence's night streets, you can't help but feel a quiet sort of pride mixed with the fatigue. It isn't a clean job, or a glamorous one, but it's part of something larger. Part of helping someone chase not just beauty, but truth. Even if that truth occasionally smells like something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. In the world orbiting Leonardo da Vinci, there is one force as constant and unpredictable as the master's own restless mind: the noble patrons. It is easy to think that the real challenge of working beside Leonardo lies in chasing his scattered projects or enduring the smell of experiments gone wrong. But truthfully, nothing compares to navigating the delicate, silent war of noble expectations. Their visits unfold like theater played in slow motion. Every word, gesture, and glance heavy with potential consequence. One misplaced phrase, a moment of visible impatience, could unravel months of careful trust, and more importantly, could see commissions and support withdrawn, leaving the workshop stranded in a city where reputation is as vital as talent. Late in the afternoon, just as the workshop settles into that quieter rhythm of evening, the inevitable knock arrives. Not the hurried, clumsy tap of a merchant, nor the soft, uncertain knock of a fellow artist. This knock is deliberate. 3 firm raps against the heavy wooden door, each spaced with a kind of measured pause only men of rank or wealth seem to practice. You glance at Leonardo, who remains as he always does in such moments, bent over a sketch, entirely indifferent to the interruption. Without a word, you rise and cross the cool stone floor, adjusting your tunic out of reflex as you reach for the iron handle. Opening the door reveals exactly what you expected. A nobleman, dressed in finely cut velvet trimmed with gold thread, his cloak marked discreetly with a Medici crest. Behind him stand 2 attendants, both quiet and watchful, eyes scanning the doorway and everything beyond it. The nobleman's gaze flicks to you, and in that moment, you feel the weight of the entire workshop's future balanced on your next few words. "Good afternoon, my lord," you say evenly, voice steady, posture just deferential enough without seeming servile. "Master da Vinci is within. Would you care to enter?" The nobleman does not answer immediately, but instead steps forward with the easy assumption that the world will always open before him. You step aside smoothly, letting him pass, and as he crosses the threshold, you catch the faint tightening of his mouth, the inevitable reaction to the workshop's unique aroma. An uneven blend of oil paints, aged parchment, and the sharper, less pleasant traces of Leonardo's anatomical studies. His attendants follow, silent shadows flanking him as he pauses in the center of the room. Leonardo does not rise to greet him. Instead, he lifts his eyes only briefly from his work table, giving the nobleman a glance that is more acknowledgement than welcome. It falls to you, as always, to smooth over the silence. Master has been deeply engaged in his current commission, you say carefully, your words offering both explanation and subtle apology. His focus is total, as your excellency would no doubt expect. The nobleman studies Leonardo for a long, silent moment before gesturing toward a parchment roll carried by one of his attendants. "There is to be a new mural," he says in a tone as calm as it is commanding, "for the Palazzo Vecchio, grand in scale, a historical subject. We trust Master da Vinci will find the commission worthy of his attention. Leonardo's brush moves across the paper in front of him, as though the words are nothing more than background noise. But you notice his hand pausing, ever so slightly. He is listening, even if his face remains unreadable. Once again, the moment hangs in silence, and once again, you step forward, a quiet buffer between genius and expectation. His Excellency's confidence honors us, you reply with careful precision. Naturally, such a work would require careful planning. The master's schedule is, how shall I say, fully committed at present, though I am certain he would wish to review the proposal in detail. It is a balancing act performed on the edge of a blade. Too eager, and the workshop would drown under impossible promises. Too cautious, and the noble might take offense. The nobleman's expression does not change, but his fingers tap lightly against the scroll, as though weighing not just its contents, but the worth of the man standing before him. Scheduling, he repeats, voice dry. Of course. Leonardo finally speaks then, voice low and even, without looking up. A mural for the Palazzo Vecchio is no small thing. His words fall like smooth stones into a still pond, simple, deliberate, undeniable. The nobleman inclines his head slightly, precisely why we approach only the finest. Leonardo's brush continues its work, a quiet answer in itself. You take this as your cue to move things along, offering quiet words about timing, about necessary materials, about the master's desire for complete artistic freedom. All of it carefully phrased, each sentence structured to smooth over any rough edge before it can form. Throughout, the nobleman remains composed, but his eyes sweep across the workshop with subtle calculation. He lingers on the covered tables in the far corner, perhaps suspecting something unusual there, but wisely does not ask. To distract him further, you offer wine. This is a well-practiced move. A jug of dark red sits always ready on a side table for exactly such occasions. Pouring 2 cups, you offer one to the nobleman, and with a slight nod, he accepts. His attendants, ever silent, do not partake. Their role is to watch, not to enjoy. As the conversation continues, you find yourself measuring every word, as if setting stones for a bridge, each one needing to fit precisely, so that the whole will hold together under pressure. Promises must be made, but never fixed. Dates suggested, but never confirmed. It is a game of shadows and meanings, as intricate as anything Leonardo sketches on his finest vellum. When the meeting finally draws to a close, dusk has settled fully outside, casting long blue shadows across the floor. The nobleman sets his empty cup down with deliberate grace. "We shall send word," he says, voice measured. "Master da Vinci's talents deserve the highest stage. We await your message with anticipation," you reply, dipping your head once more as you escort him and his attendants to the door. Only once the final footstep has echoed down the street and the heavy door is secured again, do you let out a quiet breath. The workshop feels lighter without the weight of noble presence pressing against its walls. Leonardo, still standing by his work table, glances over at you with something that might, in another man, be called gratitude. "I trust you handled them," he says simply. "As always," you answer, returning to your place beside him, the air now filled only with the quiet scratch of brush on parchment and the gentle rustle of the evening breeze through the open window. And in that moment, with the city's torches flickering far below, and the workshop once again settled into its own rhythm, you understand the quiet necessity of it all. To keep the patrons satisfied, without ever letting them pull the strings too tightly. To balance art and power, brush and gold, idea and obligation. It is, in its own quiet way, as delicate and vital a craft as anything Leonardo himself might draw. The workshop grows still as night settles in. The windows show only darkness now, and the air feels heavier, quieter. You've put away brushes, closed pigment jars, folded the spare parchment. Yet Leonardo remains at his table, bent over a fresh sheet, sketching by the flicker of a single candle. His hand moves slowly, filling the room with that steady whisper of quill on paper. It's a sound you've come to know, like breathing. Sitting nearby, head resting on crossed arms, you watch him for a moment longer before your eyes slip shut. Sleep pulls at you gently, carried along by the quiet rhythm of his sketching. His brush never stops, not even as your breathing deepens and the workshop fades into silence behind closed eyelids. Outside, Florence sleeps, but within these walls, art is still being born, line by line, stroke by stroke. What Leonardo sketches tonight will soon leave this quiet room and become something much larger. And so, from this final, quiet moment beside the candlelight, we now turn toward that grander stage, the cold, echoing hall where the Last Supper begins. The cold weight of early morning sits quietly on your shoulders as you step beyond the familiar, tangled world of Leonardo's workshop and into the open streets of Florence. The sky holds that pale, washed-out gray of pre-dawn, a color neither warm nor entirely cold, somewhere between marble and silver. Each step echoes softly against the stone underfoot, the rhythm of your boots measured and deliberate. Today, there is no list of pigments or metal scraps tucked into your sleeve. There is no canvas to fetch or brush to prepare in the cluttered studio. Instead, you are heading toward something larger, toward a different kind of work entirely. Santa Maria del Grazie rises ahead of you now, pale against the dim sky. The monastery stands like a monument to quiet endurance, all smooth stone and arches that curve against the weight of the world. This is not just another commission. It is not simply another grand painting for a noble family's private hall. What waits inside is the Last Supper, or rather, the blank wall where the Last Supper will soon take shape. As you pass through the tall monastery doors, the air changes. It always does in places like this. Gone is the sharp, oil-slick scent of the studio, replaced with something quieter. Cool plaster, old incense, a faint dusting of flour, and bread from the monastery's morning kitchens, tucked far beyond the main halls. There is space here, too much of it, perhaps. The walls stretch tall and wide, casting shadows that seem deeper than they should. Somewhere distantly, a bell rings out a single slow note, marking the hour for monks who live by time, measured not in brushstrokes, but in prayers. Your footsteps echo against polished floors as you move through the long, narrow corridors, making your way toward the workshop area prepared specifically for Leonardo. Unlike the bustling workshops scattered through Florence's streets, this space feels still, almost hollow. And there, at the far end, you finally see it, the wall. It stretches in front of you like a fortress, a blank canvas on a monumental scale, higher and wider than any canvas you've ever stretched or prepared. The fresh plaster laid in thin coats glimmers faintly under shafts of morning light pouring through high windows. And standing before it, arms folded and head tilted back slightly, is Leonardo himself. He does not turn as you approach. He does not need to. His focus is already deep, settled on the pale surface ahead. You fall into step beside him silently, letting your gaze follow his. The wall holds no visible lines yet, no colors, no faces. Nothing to suggest the grand scene it will soon display. And yet, even in its emptiness, it feels heavy. Important. Leonardo speaks after a long pause, his voice quiet and low enough to barely stir the cold air. A wall like this demands patience. You nod slightly, though he isn't really asking for agreement. His fingertips lift slowly, hovering just above the plaster without touching it, as though feeling the weight and texture through the air itself. There is no canvas large enough for such a thing, he adds, almost to himself. Not in Florence, not anywhere. You glance around the empty space again. Tools are already set up nearby. Rows of brushes, carefully arranged pots of pigment stacked on wooden tables, ladders leaning against one side. Yet there is a different sense here than in the usual workshop. It isn't cluttered, There are no half-finished models or scraps of parchment drifting like leaves on the floor. Everything is deliberate, chosen, balanced, quietly. You begin unpacking what you brought. Fresh sheets of vellum, folded cloths, jars sealed tight against the cold. You stack them on the nearest table, moving slowly, so as not to disturb the heavy stillness that fills the air. Each sound, the brush of cloth, the clink of glass, feels louder here than it would in the workshop. Leonardo moves as well, walking slowly along the length of the wall, arms now crossed behind his back. His gaze shifts from point to point, eyes tracing invisible lines. You recognize the look. He is already painting it in his mind. Every fold of fabric, every hand gesture, every careful balance between the 12 figures that will soon take shape. And then, almost without warning, he gestures for you to hand him a stick of charcoal. You do so carefully, the thin black rod resting light in your palm as you pass it to him. Leonardo takes it with the same quiet focus, stepping up to the wall's pale surface. The first line he draws is so faint you almost miss it, a light curve barely touching the plaster. But as he works, the shape grows. Another line follows, then another. Soon there are the beginnings of 12 seated figures, and a central shape standing taller than the rest. Each stroke carries no hesitation, as though the image already exists, and Leonardo is simply revealing it one mark at a time. For the next hour, there is nothing but the soft scratch of charcoal against plaster. No words, no footsteps. Only the faint sound of monks passing in distant hallways, their quiet voices echoing like waves on a stone shore. It strikes you as you watch how different this is from the chaos of other commissions. There is no noble hovering nearby, no impatient merchant asking for quicker progress. The monastery's walls hold a kind of stillness that allows Leonardo's slow, deliberate rhythm to unfold as it must. When he pauses, finally stepping back to survey the faint figures emerging on the wall, you step closer as well. Already, you can see the outlines of the story taking form. The central figure, Christ, seated with calm gravity. The disciples leaning forward or pulling back, caught in a perfect frozen moment. It is only charcoal for now, yet the tension between them hums like a plucked string. Leonardo speaks again, his voice softer than before. Do you see how they move? Even now? You nod, eyes tracing the incomplete shapes. Even without faces. He smiles faintly at that. Just a flicker of amusement before he turns back to his tools. He begins checking the pots of pigment now, lifting each lid carefully, inspecting the color. Some pigments shimmer dark and rich, others pale and delicate as dust. You move to assist him, setting out brushes, adjusting the placement of ladders so they stand steady against the wall. It becomes clear that this will not be like other days in the workshop. Here, there is no clutter, no endless shifting from project to project. Leonardo's focus does not waver, and as you help prepare the final pieces, filling small bowls with water, adjusting the cloth beneath the brushes, you feel a different kind of weight settle into your chest. The kind of weight that comes not from exhaustion or frustration, but from standing beside something larger than yourself, from realizing fully that this wall and these quiet, slow movements will one day be seen by more eyes than any canvas you've stretched, any pigment you've mixed. By the time the sun has risen fully and light fills the hall in golden beams, the outlines on the wall stretch clear and unmistakable. 12 figures, one central presence. A story that has waited centuries to be painted again, now beginning to take form beneath Leonardo's hand. And as the monastery bell tolls once more, calling monks to their midday prayers, you stand quietly beside the maestro, watching both the wall and the light shift across its surface, knowing with certainty that the real work has only just begun. The quiet intensity of the monastery workshop persists over the days that follow, each morning unfolding into long hours spent beneath the pale outlines, now growing sharper on the wall. Yet as steady as Leonardo's hand remains while sketching, as sure as his vision seems in those first confident strokes. There is a hidden struggle already beginning to take shape alongside the figures. A battle not against stone or space, but against the very materials meant to bring his vision to life. From the first time you help him mix the paints, it's clear this is no ordinary process. Leonardo refuses to use the standard fresco method, applying pigment into fresh, wet plaster, calling it too restrictive. The colors dry too quickly, he says, losing their depth, their richness. Instead, he insists on a new technique, layering paint onto dry plaster in carefully prepared emulsions of oil, resin, and other secret mixtures. It is ambitious, it is precise, and almost immediately, it becomes frustrating. You stand near the long work table now, sleeves rolled back, grinding pigments under the weight of a heavy stone. Blue from crushed lapis, red from cinnabar, green from malachite, all turned into fine, brilliant powders. Beside you, bowls of egg yolk, oil, and vinegar sit ready to be stirred into these powders, creating the delicate suspensions Leonardo insists on using. You mix with slow, steady hands, following his exact instructions. Yet no matter how carefully you work, no matter how pure the ingredients, the moment the paint touches the wall, something goes wrong. It refuses to stick. You watch, holding your breath, as Leonardo lifts a brush, loaded with that deep lapis blue, and draws a single, deliberate line across one of the figure's robes. For a moment, it gleams, the color vivid against the pale plaster. But then, slowly, the edge of the line beads up and breaks, running like spilled water down a window pane. Leonardo frowns, stepping back, brush held midair. His brow furrows, not in anger, but in calculation. You've seen that look many times before, when a gear doesn't fit quite right, when a pulley refuses to move as smoothly as it should. Still, there is something heavier about it now. This isn't a small machine hidden in a workshop. This is a mural standing in a monastery's grand hall, watched over by silent monks and silent expectations. You set aside the pestle and step forward quietly, offering a clean cloth to wipe the wall. Leonardo takes it without a word, dabbing gently at the failed stroke. The color smears slightly, leaving behind a faint blue shadow where there should have been a perfect fold of fabric. The process repeats again and again. Mix, apply. Watch the paint bead or fade or flake away altogether. Sometimes it's the oil separating from the pigment. Other times, it's the plaster beneath rejecting the mixture entirely. Too dry or too smooth to hold on to anything. You begin to feel it. Not frustration exactly, but something slower and heavier. The kind of fatigue that comes from knowing there is no easy solution. Hours stretch into afternoons, afternoons into evenings, the golden light from the monastery's high windows shifting steadily across the floor, while bowls and brushes accumulate like quiet witnesses to a battle. Neither side seems to be winning. And yet, Leonardo does not give up. He experiments constantly, adjusting the balance between oil and water, adding fine powders of volcanic ash or crushed marble dust to the mixtures in hopes of creating just the right texture. You assist as best you can, following his murmured instructions, sometimes barely hearing them as he speaks half to himself, half to the wall. At one point, you find yourself standing by the window grinding pigment well past sunset, candlelight flickering in the glass. Your fingers ache from the repetition, your clothes dusted in pale green and blue. Across the room, Leonardo paces with quiet, tireless energy, a silhouette moving back and forth against the towering blankness of the unfinished mural. It would be easy to feel defeated, easy to imagine someone else, a lesser painter, giving up, blaming the wall or the climate or fate itself. But here, there is only persistence, a kind of relentless patience that fills the silence even more than the echoes of your steps. When Leonardo finally speaks again, it's with that same measured calm as always. We'll find the right balance, he says, as though stating a simple fact. It isn't the wall's fault. nor the paints. It's the technique. We'll learn it as we go. You nod, though your arms feel heavier than before, your hands raw from mixing and grinding. Later, long after most would have left for the night, you and Leonardo both remain in the hall. By now, several small patches of color cling stubbornly to the wall, tiny victories amidst broader failures. A sleeve here, a shadowed fold there. They are enough to prove it can work, even if it refuses to do so easily. As you sit down on the cold floor, resting for a moment, you look up at the incomplete outlines and half-painted shapes above. It's strange. Even broken, even struggling, the mural already holds power. The faint colors catch the candlelight like stars half hidden behind clouds. You wonder briefly if anyone outside these walls will ever truly know the frustration behind each brushstroke. The hours spent grinding pigment until your arms burn, the countless failed mixtures, the quiet persistence behind every patch of color that does stick. And as Leonardo finally sets down his brush for the evening, wiping his hands on a cloth stained with 10 shades of blue and green, you feel the same quiet certainty you've carried since the first day walking into this space. This mural will be completed, not because it is easy, but because neither you nor Leonardo know how to walk away from something unfinished. Morning light spills once again through the high windows of the monastery hall, gilding the pale outlines of the Last Supper with soft gold. Yet today's work is not about paint or plaster. It is not about brushes or pigments or mixing delicate emulsions. Today, the focus has shifted entirely to something more human, more unsettling in its quiet way. The mural's figures need faces, and Leonardo refuses to invent them from imagination alone. Every face, each apostle, each fold of sorrow or doubt or calm must come from a living, breathing person. You first hear it from him while preparing the work table early in the day, adjusting the brushes and pigments that still refuse to behave perfectly on the plaster. Leonardo stands by the window, looking not at the wall, but at the street far below. It's not enough to sketch ideas, he says quietly, almost to himself. To capture truth, I need real faces, imperfect faces, faces that hold both grace and ugliness. You pause, glancing toward him. It's not unusual for him to use models, but this feels different. Not just study, necessity. Each figure at the table in the Last Supper must carry not only an identity, but a story etched in the lines around their eyes, the weight in their posture. It is not merely art for its own sake. It is an act of gathering the entire human condition onto one wall. By midday, you find yourself out in Florence once again, walking through markets, squares, and quieter streets with instructions to observe. Leonardo sends you not simply to bring back materials, but to watch the faces of men and women passing by, merchants arguing over coins, monks deep in quiet thought, beggars hunched in the doorways of stone churches. It feels like hunting, but instead of weapons, you carry only your eyes and a rough list in your mind. A man with a long nose and hollow cheeks, another with a rounded jaw and deep-set eyes, someone older, someone younger, each for a specific figure at the table. Leonardo joins you some days, striding through the crowds in his quiet, deliberate way, eyes constantly moving. No one knows who he's looking for, not even you. And yet, when he finds them, there's no doubt. You see it happen one morning near the wool market. A man stands there, selling oranges, his face weathered and sharp as old marble. His brows pinched together in a permanent frown, lips pressed thin from years of work and worry. Leonardo stops mid-step and watches him, head tilted slightly as though considering the exact angle of the man's cheekbones under the shifting light. "That one," Leonardo says simply, voice low. "Peter." You don't question it. You step closer, introducing yourself carefully, offering quiet explanations that carry the weight of Da Vinci's name without overwhelming the man. Some agree easily, flattered by the invitation. Others hesitate, suspicious of what it means to have their likeness caught on a monastery wall. But most, once convinced, find themselves drawn into the workshop, standing awkwardly beneath the looming, unfinished outlines, unsure where to look or how to stand. It becomes a pattern. Faces chosen from streets and taverns, from quiet churches and noisy markets. Rich men, poor men, and sometimes even those on the edge of both. Merchants fallen into debt, minor nobles out of favor. Leonardo sketches quickly once they arrive, using sheets of vellum to capture expressions and details. The slope of a nose, the deep crease between brows, the fold of skin beneath a jaw. You assist quietly, fetching clean paper, adjusting stools, sometimes helping to calm nervous models who do not understand the significance of what they're becoming a part of. Not all faces are easy to find. Judas, especially, proves difficult. Days pass with Leonardo growing quieter, more restless, as if the weight of that single figure refuses to settle in his mind. He rejects face after face, too kind, too soft, too dull. Until finally, while sitting in a small, dim tavern off the quieter end of the city square, you both see him. The man leans against the far wall, hood half drawn over his face. His eyes flick up once, sharp and suspicious, mouth set in a grim, thin line. There is something in his posture that speaks of danger, of silent betrayals waiting beneath ordinary skin. Leonardo watches him without moving, and when he finally speaks, it is with certainty. That's the one. Convincing that man takes more effort. Coins pass hands. Quiet promises are made. But eventually, he too stands within the monastery, glancing around the hall with narrowed eyes, clearly uncomfortable. You help set up the stool, adjust the lighting, fetch a sheet of clean vellum, all while Leonardo begins sketching, capturing each sharp line and shadow with ruthless precision. There is something unsettling about watching these faces come together, seeing them appear not just as individual sketches, but woven into the larger whole. One evening, long after the last model has left, you stand quietly by the wall and trace your gaze across the faintly painted outlines, now layered with real features. The fisherman's sharp nose, the merchant's rounded cheeks, the tavern man's cold eyes. Together, they form something more than themselves, something larger, heavier. Leonardo steps beside you, arms folded, studying the mural in silence. They don't know what they've given, he says softly. A face can last longer than a life. You nod, feeling the truth of that settle into your bones. These men, these faces from the streets of Florence, will linger on this wall long after their names fade. And perhaps long after yours does too. That night, as the last candle gutters low in silence returns to the monastery, you find yourself wondering, centuries from now, when strangers look up at the Last Supper, will they see the faces as purely symbolic? Or will they know that each was once a real man, walking through markets and streets just like any other, caught in a moment forever, frozen between paint and stone? The soft hush of the monastery had always suited the pace of Leonardo's work, but as the weeks turned into months, that same hush began carrying something colder beneath it, an undercurrent of tension that filled the hall like a second layer of dust on the stone floor. At first, it was nothing more than a passing glance from one monk to another as they walked through the cloisters, their footsteps slow and deliberate beneath vaulted ceilings. Then it became faint murmurs, quiet voices just out of earshot, as you carried pigment bowls or stacked brushes for Leonardo's next round of painting. It did not take long for those murmurs to reach the formality of spoken concern, expressed directly through the monastery's prior. It wasn't that Leonardo had done anything wrong by artistic standards. Quite the opposite. Each brushstroke he laid on the wall was deliberate, each color tested and layered with painstaking care. But from the perspective of those who governed this quiet place, men of discipline, prayer, and order, Leonardo's pace felt not like genius, but like indulgence. They had expected a mural, Not a lifetime's work stretched thin across the days like parchment spread too far. They wanted neat progress, steady, visible, measurable in weeks rather than in years. It was late in the afternoon when the prior sent two monks directly to the workshop. Their arrival did not announce itself in harsh tones or loud demands. Rather, it came in the form of two men standing quietly at the threshold, hands folded, robes gently brushing the floor as they waited just beyond the pools of golden light cast by the high windows. You were already adjusting brushes and wiping pigment-streaked bowls clean when you noticed them. And as always, Leonardo was so absorbed in shading the hem of a figure's robe that he seemed not to notice at all. Setting your tools aside, you approached the monks with steady, measured steps, your voice calm but low, so as not to break the quiet rhythm of Leonardo's work. You greeted them respectfully, asking whether there was something they required. The elder of the two spoke first, his expression composed but edged with quiet insistence. Prior Bandello, he explained, wished to know how much longer the maestro would continue his labors. There was no sharpness in his tone, no raised voice, only the practiced restraint of someone carrying the weight of authority, wrapped in the velvet glove of courtesy. You offered the expected answer, one that had become almost routine in recent weeks. The work required patience, you said. The maestro's process was unlike that of ordinary painters. Each figure demanded precision, each shadow deliberate shaping, each color carefully layered. You used phrases chosen to smooth sharp corners, to sound both deferential and firm. Yet as you spoke, you could see it in their faces, the quiet calculation beneath the surface, measuring not just your words, but the days already spent, the coins already paid. One of the monks, likely newer to his office, pressed further. 2 months had been the original understanding, had it not? And here they stood, long past that mark, with vast sections of the mural still only partially filled. Behind you, Leonardo's brush paused briefly in midair, as if catching the note of complaint carried between the lines of the monk's voice. Without turning, he spoke aloud, his voice calm and utterly certain. Perfection, he said quietly, is not measured in months. There was no heat in his tone, no defensiveness. Simply fact. The two monks exchanged glances before nodding and withdrawing, their departure as silent as their arrival had been. Only when they had gone did you allow yourself a long, quiet breath, tension easing from your shoulders like a weight you hadn't realized you were carrying. But that would not be the end of it. Over the following days and weeks, similar visits continued, sometimes more pointed, sometimes wrapped in more elaborate courtesy. Once, the prior himself appeared in the hall, his dark robe trailing softly as he moved with slow steps toward the center of the workshop. His expression was controlled, but unmistakably displeased, and you stepped forward to meet him before he had a chance to interrupt Leonardo directly. It was in these quiet confrontations that you came to understand just how thin the line was between art and obligation. The prior's concerns were not petty. They were practical. He spoke of the monastery's schedule, of financial accounts and public expectation. Donors and pilgrims alike had begun asking when the grand mural would be unveiled. The longer it remained incomplete, the more difficult it became to justify the expense, not just in coins, but in patience. You answered as best you could, drawing from a well of practiced responses now worn smooth from use. The mural was no ordinary commission, you explained again. Each figure required exact care. The materials demanded careful preparation. To rush would risk ruin, and such a sacred scene deserved more than mere speed. The prior listened, his eyes cool and steady beneath furrowed brows. Once, he folded his hands tightly, knuckles pale against the fabric of his sleeves, and remarked that perhaps another artist might have been better suited for the task. One less burdened by ambition. You said nothing to that, though it stung sharper than any open insult. The tension peaked one evening as shadows stretched long across the workshop floor, torches flickering in their sconces along the monastery walls. The prior arrived once more, this time alone, his presence quieter but heavier, somehow like the moment before a storm breaks. Again, Leonardo did not look up from his work, brush moving in slow, deliberate arcs across the curve of a disciple's sleeve. You stood between them once again, voice even, posture calm. The prior spoke plainly this time. The work had dragged on too long. The brethren were dissatisfied. The donors were restless. An end date must be set. His voice remained polite, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. This was no longer a gentle inquiry. It was a final warning dressed in soft cloth. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, at last, Leonardo lowered his brush and turned, eyes steady, voice quiet but absolute. "Give me time," he said, "and you will have something worthy of it." The prior studied him for a moment longer, then turned without a word, the sound of his footsteps echoing until they faded down the long stone corridor. You let out a slow breath once again, your gaze returning to the unfinished mural. There was no telling how many more days or weeks it would take, no way to know whether the prior's patience would hold long enough. But as you watched Leonardo lift his brush once more, calmly returning to his work as if nothing had changed, you understood with quiet certainty that some things were worth the weight of waiting. For weeks, perhaps months, the monastery hall holds its quiet, focused rhythm. Each day begins with that same faint hush beneath the vaulted ceilings, sunlight drifting in golden stripes across the tall windows, painting soft beams of light onto the unfinished wall. Leonardo continues his careful work, brush lifting and falling in deliberate arcs, color layered over color until each fold of fabric and shadowed face seems to ripple with life. Slowly, the Last Supper takes form. The faces chosen from Florence's markets and taverns now gaze outward from the wall, locked forever in that single charged moment of betrayal and stillness. The monks pass through less often now, their earlier complaints settling into a kind of quiet, watchful resignation. Even the prior, with all his impatience and warnings, has grown quieter, as though realizing some things unfold at their own pace, whether he approves or not. And then, without warning, something changes. It begins subtly at first, a faint discoloration along the lower edge of one figure's robe. You notice it one morning as you set out fresh brushes and pigments. A thin, pale streak that wasn't there the day before. You step closer, squinting against the angled light. At first, you wonder if it's simply dust, a stray mark left by accident. But when you press a clean cloth to the spot, there's nothing. No smudge, no pigment on the cloth. Just the discoloration left behind, embedded in the wall itself. You say nothing at first? Not out of fear, but because you don't quite trust what your eyes are telling you. Instead, you keep watch over the next few days. And quietly, inevitably, you see more. A faint crack near the edge of another robe. A patch where the blue pigment seems duller, as if it has been left too long beneath the sun. By the end of the week, there are 5 or 6 such places, small, easily overlooked if one does not know where to look. But you know, and so does Leonardo. One evening, long after the sun has set and the workshop hall is lit only by the flickering glow of tallow candles, you stand beside him as he inspects the wall in silence. His brush is still for once, resting across the rim of a pigment bowl, forgotten. His eyes move slowly over the painted surface, tracing each crack, each discoloration. You do not need to ask what he is thinking. You already know. "It's the plaster," Leonardo says at last, voice low and measured, as though speaking the words too loudly might make the damage worse. "It does not hold as it should." You nod slowly, saying nothing, because there is nothing to say. From the beginning, he had chosen to paint onto dry plaster instead of the traditional wet method. It allowed for greater control, for more intricate layers of shading and color. But with that freedom came risk. The pigments did not bond as strongly to the wall. Time, moisture, and the slow breath of the monastery's stones worked against them from the first stroke. The realization sits heavily between you both. It is not a loud, shattering moment of failure. It is quieter than that, heavier, like watching frost slowly creep across the edge of a window pane, knowing there is nothing to be done but watch. Leonardo moves again, reaching for a clean brush, testing its weight in his hand, as though the motion might give him some new idea. But there is no fixing it, not in the way that would undo the damage completely. At best, there are adjustments, retouching, sealing sections more carefully. Yet beneath it all, the quiet truth settles in. The painting is already beginning to decay. The next morning, you stand at the wall with a damp cloth in hand, gently pressing against one of the faded patches, trying to clean it without damaging the fragile pigment. Around you, the monastery feels colder somehow, the air sharper. A few monks pass through, their footsteps echoing as always, but you sense it in them now, a subtle change in their glances. They notice, perhaps not the details, but the difference. What had once seemed a slow, unstoppable creation now holds the faint smell of impermanence. Leonardo says little in these days. His work continues, but there is a new tension in it now, a quiet urgency beneath the surface. Where before he would spend an entire afternoon adjusting the curve of a single hand or the shading around a piece of bread on the table, now he moves with slightly more speed. Not hurried, he would never allow himself that, but with less of his usual pauses to step back and consider. You recognize it for what it is, an artist racing against time, not against the demands of patrons, but against the quiet, creeping decay of the very wall he is trying to bring to life. One evening, as you prepare pigments by candlelight, you hear him speak aloud to himself. Not to you, not to the monks, just to the wall. "I have given it my best," he says softly, so quiet you almost do not hear. Whether it holds? That is no longer mine to decide. You glance toward him, saying nothing, because there are no words that would not sound hollow in that moment. Instead, you continue grinding pigment, slow and steady, the rhythm familiar, almost comforting. The process does not change, even if the outcome does. There are smaller signs too, tiny flakes of pigment collecting on the stone floor beneath the mural, like the first fall of autumn leaves before a long winter. You sweep them away quietly, gathering them into a small cloth so the monks do not notice. It is not a deception, not really. It is simply an attempt to buy more time, to let the mural live longer before its secrets are laid bare. One afternoon, Prior Bandalo comes again. This time, he does not speak of delays or costs. He stands in the hall with arms folded, eyes scanning the wall with a kind of resigned detachment. Perhaps he senses it too, that the work is both finished and already beginning to fade. At its greatest beauty lies not just in its completion, but in its fragility. Leonardo speaks to him quietly, offering no promises. The prior listens, then leaves, his footsteps fading away once more. And in his absence, the hall feels quieter than it ever has. You find yourself wondering, late at night when the candles burn low and the pigment bowls sit empty, whether all great works must carry this same weight, whether true beauty is always bound to fade, simply because nothing perfect can last. Leonardo continues painting for as long as he can, touching up sections, sealing others. But both of you know it now. The first signs of decay have set in, and nothing, not oil, not pigment, not genius, can hold back time forever. Even with the quiet knowledge that the wall will not hold its colors forever, there comes a final day, a quiet morning when the last brushstroke is laid, and there is nothing more left to add. The hall feels different on that morning. It is not just the light streaming through the tall monastery windows, though the sun seems softer somehow, casting golden warmth across the stone floor. It is not just the silence either, though there are no footsteps echoing today, no monks pacing through as they often do. It is something deeper, a kind of stillness that settles into the bones of the place, the weight of an ending. Leonardo stands beside you, arms crossed loosely, eyes fixed on the mural. His brush rests idle on the work table, its bristles stained with the faintest trace of lapis blue. For once, there is no pigment being mixed, no instructions murmured beneath his breath, no restless pacing. There is only watching. You stand beside him, your arms folded as well, mirroring his quiet posture without thinking. Together, the two of you look up at the Last Supper, now complete. The 12 apostles lean toward one another in eternal conversation, their faces caught in that perfect balance of grace and human tension. The central figure of Christ sits calm amid the movement, hands outstretched, a silent anchor in the middle of that swirling moment. It holds your gaze the way the sea holds light, constant and unblinking. For a long while, there are no words between you. Only the faint crackle of candle wicks burning low, and the echo of your own breath. You feel the chill of the monastery's stone beneath your feet, grounding you in this moment. The air carries that familiar mix of oil and dust, faint now, almost forgotten after so many months spent inhaling it. Leonardo speaks at last, voice low and steady, as if he does not want to disturb the stillness too harshly. "It's never finished," he says, more to himself than to you. "Not truly." You nod once, understanding. No painting is ever truly finished in the mind of its creator. There is always another line to refine, another shadow to deepen, another adjustment that could shift everything. But there comes a point where the hand must rest, where the brush must be set down and the work must stand on its own. You step forward then, moving closer to the wall, not too close, just near enough to let your eyes trace the details one last time. The folds of fabric layered in delicate color, the shadows cast beneath a hand, the subtle tilt of a head caught in mid-thought. It strikes you, not for the first time, how each figure holds a different kind of weight. Peter, leaning forward in anxious loyalty. Judas, half-turned, eyes shadowed in quiet betrayal. John, head bowed in quiet sorrow. All of them drawn from real faces, real people who now walk Florence's streets, unaware that their likeness has been caught forever in plaster and paint. You glance back toward Leonardo, watching as he folds his arms tighter, as if steadying himself against a wind that has not yet arrived. His face, so often marked by focus or quiet irritation, holds something else now, something closer to tiredness. But not defeat. Never that. It is the look of a man who has given everything he could, knowing both its worth and its limits. The monastery remains still around you both. The monks have not come today. Perhaps they know it is best to leave the hall quiet. Or perhaps they, too, sense the weight of this final moment. You let out a slow breath, eyes returning to the mural one last time. From where you stand now, there is no sign of the small cracks or the faint patches where color has already begun to dull. There is only the mural as it was meant to be seen, whole, alive, a single frozen moment held between silence and history. Leonardo turns toward the work table at last, fingers resting lightly on its edge. His brush lies there, stained and worn, a quiet relic of all the hours spent bending over this vast wall. He does not pick it up again. Instead, he glances toward you with a rare flicker of quiet satisfaction. "Let them come," he says softly. "Let them see." You nod again, stepping back from the wall, letting the mural fill the hall without your shadow interrupting it. It belongs to the space now, to the monks, to Florence, to history. As you both leave the hall, your footsteps slow, echoing gently along the stone corridor. The air outside carries the scent of bread baking somewhere down the street, and for the first time in many months, your hands are free of pigment dust, your sleeves unstained by oil or plaster. You know the work is done. And yet, as you glance back through the tall wooden doors one final time, you also know the work is only beginning. Not in the hands of Leonardo now, nor in your own, but in the quiet hunt for what comes next. Because as grand as the Last Supper is, it is only one part of a much larger story. Leonardo's notebooks remain scattered across tables and shelves, half filled with sketches and ideas not yet made real. Some of them already lost, some whispered about in taverns and workshops as rumors. And so, as you step fully back into the sunlight, leaving the monastery, and its quiet hall behind, the next chapter waits quietly beyond the horizon. The story of the lost notebooks begins. Returning to Leonardo's workshop, after months spent in the solemn quiet of Santa Maria del Grazie, feels like stepping into another world entirely. A world not of controlled order and silent prayer, but of carefully managed chaos. The air inside the studio is heavier here, tinged with the scent of linseed oil, wax, and old parchment. Sunlight filters through narrow windows and fractured beams, catching on motes of dust that swirl through the space, as though the very air carries the residue of all Leonardo's unfinished thoughts. You stand just inside the door for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the familiar tangle of objects spread across every surface. It is as though time never passed. Tables groan beneath the weight of books stacked 3 high, wooden models half-assembled with gears and pulleys frozen mid-motion, and sketches pinned to walls and boards at every angle. There are brushes left bristled down in cups of murky water, pigment bowls hardened with forgotten colors, sheets of vellum curling at the corners where they have dried and bent. It is not merely untidy, it is alive, in a quiet, sprawling way that speaks of constant invention rather than carelessness. Your first task, as always, is to bring some sense of structure to this beautiful, frustrating mess. You begin with the easiest corner, gathering stray parchment sheets into neat piles, careful to avoid disturbing sketches mid-drawing or notes scrawled in Leonardo's famously mirrored script. Each page holds something different. Anatomical studies drawn in delicate cross-sections, architectural designs for bridges that may never be built, mysterious machines whose purposes remain unclear, even after all this time. You cannot help pausing now and then to study a page more closely, tracing the lines with your eyes, wondering what prompted this particular thought or curve. Even the tools themselves demand attention. Brushes are cleaned and laid out in proper rows. Pigment stones are gathered into neat stacks by color. Ground powders return to their rightful jars. At times, you discover things that surprise even you. A small brass instrument hidden beneath a sheaf of papers, its purpose entirely unknown. Or a sealed jar filled with liquid that has long since separated into strange layers of blue and gold. The floor needs sweeping too, not just to clear away the dust and shavings, but to prevent accidents. More than once you've seen apprentices trip over wooden frames or spill precious pigment simply because there was no clear path between tables. Slowly, methodically, you carve out that path now, lifting stools, straightening boards, shifting heavy books back onto shelves. The cat from before reappears, weaving between your legs with a flick of its tail, utterly unfazed by the disruption. Leonardo himself is not yet in the room. Likely, he has wandered off to the garden or the city square, his mind caught on some quiet thread of thought. This leaves you with a rare pocket of time to truly set things right, or as right as they can ever be in a place like this. What strikes you most as you work is how easily brilliance can become buried under its own weight. For all his genius, Leonardo does not always keep track of where things are. You find notebooks stacked beneath boxes of pigments, brushes hidden in drawers meant for parchment, metal tools mixed in with anatomical models. Once you uncover an entire sketchbook wedged behind a wooden support beam, its cover stained with oil, its pages filled with intricate diagrams of water pumps and siege devices. You wipe it clean carefully, setting it aside where Leonardo will see it when he returns. At one point, while shifting a particularly heavy stack of wooden boards used for panel painting, you uncover a small chest tucked beneath the work table. Its lid creaks as you open it, revealing yet more papers, many of them yellowed and curling at the edges. These pages feel different, older, forgotten. You spread them out on the nearest clear surface, eyes scanning the lines and curves with quiet curiosity. Some drawings you recognize, variants of machines Leonardo has shown you before, but others are entirely new. Complex spirals and symbols, unlike anything in his usual style. Notes written hastily, almost urgently, as though captured mid-thought in some fevered rush of invention. You wonder quietly, how many such chests might be hidden in corners you have yet to search? How many pages of genius have slipped between cracks and beneath shelves, waiting quietly to be found again? The afternoon sun shifts, casting longer shadows through the studio. By now, most of the floor is clear. Brushes stand in neat rows. Pigments are organized by shade and use. Papers rest in stacked piles, sorted into categories as best you can manage. Anatomy, architecture, mechanics, painting studies. It is still a cluttered place by ordinary standards, but now it breathes more easily. There is space to move, to think, to work, without stumbling over the remnants of yesterday's thoughts. Leonardo returns just as you are wiping down the last work table with a cloth, dampened from the studio's rain barrel. He stands in the doorway for a moment, arms folded loosely, eyes scanning the newly organized space with a flicker of something between amusement and quiet approval. "You've made order from disorder," he says softly, stepping inside. "I've tried," you answer, setting the cloth aside. "Though I think it will not stay that way for long." He smiles faintly, as though acknowledging a truth too obvious to argue with. His gaze lingers on the piles of parchment you've arranged, then drifts to the uncovered chest and its scattered contents. "Ah," he murmurs, moving closer, fingertips brushing lightly over the older pages. "I had forgotten these." It is a simple statement, but you feel its weight all the same. Forgotten, not because they were unimportant, but because there is simply too much to hold in one mind at once. Too many thoughts, too many inventions, too many ideas spiraling outward like the gears in one of Leonardo's own machines. You say nothing, simply standing quietly as he leafs through the pages, eyes narrowed in thought. The room feels steady now, its quiet no longer marked by disarray, but by the calm pulse of potential. And as the evening light slants lower, painting the floor in long golden strips, you realize that organizing Leonardo's workshop is not just about tidying a space. It is about preserving the pieces of something larger, a mind too vast to ever be contained by walls and shelves alone. The next search will take you beyond these walls, through cities and across borders, carrying those pages safely from one place to the next. But for now, for this moment, everything rests exactly where it should. Not every part of working beside Leonardo takes place within the quiet clutter of his workshop, or beneath the towering walls of monasteries. Some days require stepping beyond Florence's familiar streets entirely, journeys marked not by brushstrokes or pigments, but by dust on your boots, wind tugging at your cloak, and the weight of leather-bound pages hidden beneath layers of fabric. Because for all Leonardo's scattered papers and cluttered sketches, there are times when those notes must be moved, carried from one city to another, to be shown, delivered, or simply kept safe from watchful eyes. It always begins the same way, with a quiet request spoken from the corner of the workshop as Leonardo rifles through his stacks of vellum. "These need to go," he says, passing you a bundle bound in thin leather straps. He never says precisely why, whether to deliver them to a patron, to keep them from a rival artist, or simply because Florence feels too dangerous at the moment. You've learned not to ask. What matters is that the papers arrive intact. You prepare carefully. The pages are wrapped in cloth, secured inside a satchel worn from years of similar errands. Beneath the surface, it looks like an ordinary traveler's pack. Worn leather, stained fabric, nothing to draw attention. But you know better. Inside are sketches and diagrams worth more than gold, designs for flying machines, notes on anatomy so precise they border on forbiddance, fortification plans detailed enough to interest any city-state or army. The road out of Florence begins with the city gates, tall and dark beneath the early morning sky. You slip through with quiet steps, joining the steady trickle of merchants, farmers, and pilgrims. The guards at the gate glance at you only briefly, eyes sliding past without lingering. They see only a servant or assistant, not someone carrying the quiet pulse of genius hidden beneath wool and leather. Once beyond the city, the world opens wide and rough around you. The road winds between rolling hills and quiet fields, dust rising with each step. In the distance, farmhouses sit squat against the landscape, smoke curling gently from their chimneys. But the further you travel, the thinner the crowds become. By midday, there are stretches where it is only you, the road, and the quiet weight of the satchel against your back. The danger is not in the towns. It is in these empty stretches between them. Bandits watch these roads, especially the less traveled paths between Florence and Milan or smaller cities scattered along the Arno River. Travelers carrying goods are easy targets. And while you carry no coin, no silk, no jewelry, what you hold could buy a dozen such things if the right or wrong person knew its value. You keep your head down as you walk, cloak pulled close, eyes low, moving steadily without drawing notice. In one hand, you carry a simple walking stick, part for balance, part for defense if needed. It is not the first time you've made such a journey, nor the first time you felt eyes on your back from some unseen watcher hidden in the scrub and trees. Once, midway between towns, a figure does appear. A man on horseback, emerging from a stand of olive trees along the side of the road. His clothes are worn, face shadowed beneath a broad hat. He watches you quietly as you pass, saying nothing, yet matching your pace from horseback, just long enough to make the hair on the back of your neck rise. You keep walking, steady and calm, heart beating a little faster beneath your tunic. After a long moment, the rider turns and vanishes back into the trees. You do not slow until the next village's bell tower appears on the horizon. Nights on the road are colder than you ever remember them being in the workshop. You find shelter where you can. A shared bed in a tavern's common room. The corner of a stable offered by a quiet farmer. The satchel never leaves your side. It stays tucked beneath your head while you sleep, one hand resting on its strap. Even in towns where the streets are brightly lit, where the scent of roasting chestnuts and wine drifts through the air, you do not let it out of your reach. Each morning, you rise early and set out again. The road feels both endless and strangely calming. A quiet rhythm of dust and wind and leather creaking against your shoulder. And always the quiet weight of those pages. Sometimes, when you stop to rest beneath a tree or beside a river, you untie the satchel straps just enough to glance at them. Vellum sheets marked in Leonardo's familiar mirrored script. Diagrams so precise they look like maps to some unknown machine or anatomical detail. You never read too closely. It is enough simply to know what you carry. The journey ends, as all journeys must, at a new set of city gates. Milan's tall, fortified walls rise before you in the afternoon light, guards standing watch at their posts. This time, the satchel is examined more carefully. The guards here are sharper-eyed, more thorough. You speak in calm, steady tones, offering a letter of introduction sealed in wax with Leonardo's mark, an agreement arranged in advance with Ludovico Sforza's household or whichever patron is waiting at the other end. The guards read it, glance at you, then wave you through. Inside the city, the streets feel different from Florence. Wider, colder, more formal somehow. But it does not matter. Your first stop is always the same. Delivering the satchel to the agreed-upon workshop, the trusted contact, the nobleman's clerk. You pass it off with careful hands, ensuring the papers are received intact that the seal remains unbroken. Only then do you allow yourself a moment to breathe freely. Later that evening, as you sit in a quiet corner of a Milanese tavern with a cup of watered wine in hand, you feel the quiet ache in your legs from days spent walking. But more than that, you feel the strange, steady satisfaction that comes from knowing the task is complete. The papers are safe. Leonardo's thoughts, carried across dangerous roads, have found their place once again. And as the candle burns low beside you, you know the next journey is never far. There will always be more pages, always more notes to carry, not just across cities, but across years. Keeping Leonardo's notebooks safe from rain and thieves is one thing. Keeping them safe from spies and rivals is something else entirely. This is not simply a matter of folding up pages and carrying them under your arm. In Florence and Milan both, there are always curious eyes, artists hungry for commissions, engineers seeking military contracts, envoys from rival cities hoping to glimpse just enough to steal an advantage. Leonardo's inventions, his designs for bridges, his anatomical notes, they all carry value beyond art. Quiet as he may seem, there are people who would pay handsomely to possess even a single page. You begin noticing it in small ways. A stranger loitering too long by the workshop's door, pretending to admire the building's facade. A merchant who asks too many questions about brushes and pigments, but whose eyes linger not on the paintings, but on the shelves stacked with sealed scrolls. Even the quietest faces in the taverns sometimes hold that watchful stillness. Men who drink slowly and listen faster, their cups untouched as they measure your words with quiet calculation. Leonardo never speaks of it directly, but you know he is aware. It's in the way he organizes his papers. Sketches layered beneath layers, notes folded within notes. Many of his diagrams carry deliberate misdirections. Ratios left incomplete, measurements obscured. One page might show half of a machine's workings, while the other half is hidden elsewhere. Even if someone managed to steal a handful of papers, they would only have fragments of a larger puzzle. Still, there are moments of real risk. Late one evening, after the workshop has grown quiet, and Leonardo has retired to his sleeping plank, you hear footsteps in the alley beyond the shutters. Not the steady tread of a merchant or a neighbor, but something slower, more deliberate. You rise silently, crossing the darkened room to press your ear to the wood. The steps pause, then shift again, scraping faintly against the stone. It isn't the first time. There have been other nights like this. Sometimes it's a rival artist's apprentice sent to sneak a glance through the windows. Other times, it's something more dangerous, a political agent hoping to glimpse designs that could shift the balance between Florence and Milan, or even further afield. You step back from the shutters quietly, moving through the workshop with practiced ease. You know exactly where the most valuable pages are kept. Not in plain sight on the work tables, but hidden in the layered drawers beneath the pigment shelves, tucked inside hollowed-out boards, rolled into scrolls sealed with ordinary wax, and marked only with meaningless symbols. You check them now, just to be certain. Everything remains as it should be. The chest beneath the workbench is locked, its key tucked inside Leonardo's robes. Even if someone broke through the door, they would find nothing but blank canvases and empty scrolls left out for exactly that purpose. In the morning, you mention it to Leonardo. He nods thoughtfully, dipping a brush into a bowl of ochre without looking up. There are always eyes, he says simply. Always ears. It is part of the work. You know he's right. It becomes part of your routine, as natural as mixing pigments or fetching water, watching faces in the market, noting who lingers too long near the workshop door, learning to fold pages so that crucial notes remain hidden until they are meant to be seen. Sometimes, Leonardo gives you pages written entirely in code, dense blocks of mirrored script accompanied by symbols that mean nothing to anyone else. You know enough to handle them, but never to read them fully. That, too, is intentional. Leonardo trusts few people with the whole picture. Even you only see parts. Traveling between cities sharpens this instinct further. Milan especially brims with quiet watchers, sportsmen, artists working for competing nobles, soldiers with too much free time. When you carry Leonardo's notebooks through the streets there, it feels like carrying a flame cupped in your hands, trying to shield it from the wind. Every glance feels heavier. Every question carries weight. Once, while waiting at a gatehouse to deliver papers to a patron's clerk, you catch a man watching you from across the courtyard. He stands beside a cart piled high with barrels, but his eyes never stray from you. When your delivery is done, and you step back into the street, you find him following. Not close enough to call attention, but never too far behind. You lead him in a slow circle through the outer market stalls, pausing now and then, as if considering a loaf of bread or a bolt of fabric, until finally you cut through a narrow side alley known only to locals. When you emerge onto the main street again, he is gone. You report these things to Leonardo. He listens quietly, nodding as he sketches the curve of a bridge's arch on fresh vellum. "It is as I expected," he says softly, "but they will not find what they hope." Over time, you learn to handle the smaller tricks as well, sealing scrolls with wax mixed with ash so that any tampering shows at once, folding diagrams within false covers, ordinary poetry pages wrapped around hidden layers of military design. Even the placement of sketches within the workshop becomes part of the system. The least important pages left openly on the tables, while the truly valuable ones remain folded within sealed chests or tucked behind loose stones in the workshop wall. It is not only rival artists and political agents you must be wary of. There are also whispers of church officials, watching more closely than they should, particularly when it comes to Leonardo's anatomical studies. Such things skirt the edge of forbidden knowledge. You know better than to leave those drawings in plain sight. Late at night, you fold them carefully, storing them beneath locked lids lined with soft cloth, ensuring no casual glance from a passing cleric would reveal more than harmless art. The balance becomes second nature, creating just enough openness to seem harmless, while keeping the heart of Leonardo's work hidden and secure. It is not a perfect system, nothing is, but it keeps the most dangerous knowledge out of dangerous hands. On quieter days, as the sun slants through the shutters and dust drifts lazily through the air, you sometimes find yourself wondering how much of Leonardo's work will ever be seen by the world at all. How many pages will remain locked away in chests and hidden behind loose stones, their secrets known only to the two of you. And in that quiet wondering, there is a certain satisfaction. Some things are meant to endure. Others are meant to be hidden. And in Leonardo's workshop, both truths live side by side. The longer you spend in Leonardo's orbit, the more familiar you become with the quiet background hum of incomplete things, unfinished paintings, half-built machines, and sketches trailing off midline as if his hand simply stopped moving. But over time, you begin noticing something different. Not merely unfinished work, but missing work, entire pages, whole notebooks that once sat in clear stacks along the workshop shelves, now gone without explanation. It is not the usual scatter and clutter of daily mess. These are gaps that feel deliberate, sharp as a missing tooth. At first, you assume it is simply misplacement. The workshop is no small space after all, and no day passes without papers being shuffled, rearranged, tucked into new piles. You spend hours searching, behind shelves, beneath pigment jars, inside the hollowed-out beams where Leonardo stores particularly sensitive designs. But there is nothing. Sheets you distinctly remember handling only days before. Anatomical diagrams marked with careful notes. Flying machine sketches folded in threes have vanished. You bring it up to Leonardo while he sits hunched over a fresh page, carefully inking the curve of a new pulley system. "Master," you begin quietly, careful not to break his focus too harshly. "Some of the notes, I cannot find them." He pauses, quill hovering mid-air. His brow furrows slightly, and for a long moment he says nothing. Then, very softly, "Which ones?" You describe them as best you can. The layout, the color of the parchment, the distinct markings in the corner. Leonardo listens, eyes narrowing not in anger, but in thought. "They were here," he murmurs, more to himself than to you. "I left them on the table near the second window. And yet they are not there, nor anywhere else in the workshop." The realization settles between you both, quieter and heavier than a spoken accusation. It would be easy to assume theft. There are always eyes on the workshop, as you know too well. But when you search for signs, scraped locks, broken seals, there is nothing. No forced entry, no marks out of place. The loss is clean, invisible. From that day forward, the gap becomes impossible to ignore. More than once, Leonardo stands in the middle of the workshop, arms folded, eyes scanning the walls as if willing the pages to reappear. His sketches continue, but with a new layer of caution. Fewer pages left in the open, more deliberate folding, more careful sealing. At night, when the streets outside grow quiet and the candle flames burn low, you find yourself going over the workshop shelves again and again, as if some hidden compartment might reveal what's missing, but it never does. The pages are simply gone. And it isn't just in Florence. The same thing happens in Milan. Weeks after arriving there for new commissions, you notice once again that certain bundles of parchment you packed yourself are not among the ones unpacked. This time, Leonardo says nothing at all. He only tightens his grip on the folded scroll in his hand, eyes dark beneath his brow. You hear rumors, of course. Whispers in taverns and market stalls. Stories about secret notebooks locked away in the vaults of noble families. Sketches of impossible devices held in quiet collections no one outside those circles is ever meant to see. You sit at wooden tables, nursing cups of watered wine, listening without revealing too much. Once, a merchant's son boasts of having seen a design for a flying machine, so perfect it could have come only from Da Vinci's own hand. But when you press him, asking how he knows, he clams up, voice dropping to a hush, eyes flicking left and right before he excuses himself altogether. It does not feel like idle talk. It feels like fragments of something larger, a story half told, a puzzle half solved. Leonardo's silence on the matter becomes its own kind of answer. He does not speak of the missing pages anymore, but he guards what remains of his notebooks with tighter care. Fewer apprentices are allowed near them. Fewer patrons get even a glimpse. You begin carrying the most valuable bundles yourself, strapped beneath your tunic or tucked into satchels wrapped in plain cloth. There are times when you leave entire bundles hidden beneath loose floorboards in the workshop, rather than risk moving them openly. The mystery deepens further when one day, while cleaning the back corner of the workshop, you find a single sheet of parchment tucked behind a stack of unused frames. At first glance, it looks like ordinary scrap, creased, stained with oil. But when you smooth it out, your heart stirs. It is a page from the missing set. You recognize the handwriting instantly. Leonardo's mirrored script, looping carefully along the page. Half a diagram for a gear system, one you remember seeing complete weeks ago. Yet here, it is cut off midline. You bring it to Leonardo without a word. He takes it, turning it over slowly in his hands. For a long moment, he says nothing. Then, only one. You nod, standing quietly beside him as he places the page on the work table, weighing it down with a small brass tool to keep it flat. The question lingers in the air between you both. If one page remains, where are the others? There are no clear answers, only possibilities. Perhaps they were taken deliberately. Perhaps Leonardo himself hid them so well that even he forgot where. Or perhaps, though you do not say this aloud, they were destroyed, torn or burned to keep dangerous knowledge from the wrong hands. It is not impossible. There are things in Leonardo's notebooks that would unsettle even the boldest of patrons. Machines built for war, anatomical studies that skirt too close to forbidden knowledge. Whatever the truth, the gap in the workshop's shelves remains. The missing pages become a kind of phantom presence in the room, felt even when not seen. And as you go about your tasks, grinding pigments, preparing brushes, you cannot help but glance now and then toward the chests and scrolls that remain, half wondering whether some future apprentice will one day ask the same questions about pages lost in your own time. It becomes part of the rhythm of things. Alongside paint and plaster, sketches and commissions, there is always the quiet question lingering beneath it all. Where did the missing pages go? And perhaps, more importantly, what secrets did they carry away with them? In the quiet workshops and high halls of Florence and Milan, Leonardo's notebooks may sit locked in chests or tucked beneath layers of pigment jars. But beyond those walls, his ideas take on a different life entirely. Step outside the monastery gates, wander through the narrow alleys of the city after sunset, and you find that the name Da Vinci carries a weight all its own. Not merely as an artist or an engineer, but as something almost mythical, half man, half whispered story. These stories swirl thickest in the taverns, where the smoke from low-burning lamps coils through rafters. And the rough scrape of cups against wood is as steady as a painter's hand against canvas. You sit in those places often now, partly from habit and partly because you know it's where real knowledge hides. Not in noble courts where everything is dressed in silks and silence, but in the dim corners where merchants, masons, and soldiers gather, voices lowered, eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. In these rooms, lit by flickering oil lamps and heavy with the scent of sweat and wine, every corner holds another story. Dice clack against worn tabletops, and every now and then, beneath the laughter and curses, someone leans in just a little too close, voice dropping into something quieter, something heavier. That is when the real talk begins. It always starts with a phrase as casual as a loose thread. They say Da Vinci, and then the rumor unfurls like a scroll unrolled too fast. Lines of half-truth and invention tumbling one over the next. Some say he built a machine that flies, not on paper, not as a model, but in full size, tested in secret by men sworn to silence. Others insist he crafted weapons so perfect and terrible that even the Duke of Milan refused to use them, locking them away in vaults buried beneath stone. You hear about paintings layered with codes only the Pope can read, and of bridges strong enough to span entire rivers, drawn on pages sealed so tightly, no common man would ever lay eyes on them. At first, it is easy to dismiss such things as the usual tavern talk, the kind that floats as easily as wine from one cup to another. But then the details begin to repeat. In Florence and Milan both, you hear the same phrases. Sketchbooks bound in dark leather, pages written backward, carried by couriers in plain robes with silent mouths. One merchant's son in Florence claims he saw a flying machine's frame hidden beneath tarps in a nobleman's estate, its wings stretched wide like those of a metal bird. A soldier in Milan swears he guarded a vault where pages so finely drawn they seem divine were sealed in lead and stone. You do not speak in these moments. You sit with your cup, head low, listening as the rumors braid themselves together into something almost real. It becomes clear that whatever truth Leonardo's notebooks carry, it has already slipped from the workshop into something much larger, something neither you nor even the master himself can control. One night in particular settles in your memory like ink pressed too deep into parchment. You are seated at a scarred wooden table in a smaller tavern near Milan's outer gate, a place where soldiers and masons drink shoulder to shoulder, where the walls are streaked with soot and the floor sticky with old wine. At the next table, two men speak in the low tones that always signal something meant not for every ear. One is younger, with the square jaw and broad hands of a stonecutter. The other older, leaner, his face lined beneath a graying beard. The younger man leans in, voice dropping. They say there's a book, he murmurs. and immediately your ears sharpen beneath the hood of your cloak. Not a handful of pages, a whole codex, one that holds everything. Machines, paintings, secrets no man was meant to know. The older man snorts once, but there is no dismissal in his eyes. "Aye," he says quietly, "but they say it's cursed. Any man who tries to steal it disappears." Your fingers tighten slightly around your cup, though you keep your face still. You know there is truth in what they say. You have seen pages sealed and hidden, carried beneath your own cloak, and you know how easily such things vanish into locked rooms and silent corridors. Over weeks and months, these whispers become as much a part of your life as grinding pigment or arranging brushes. You hear them in Florence's wealthier halls, where servants carry stories from room to room beneath silver trays. You hear them in Milan's market squares, traded as easily as bolts of cloth. Some say Leonardo burned his own pages to keep them safe. Others insist they were stolen by French kings, or buried beneath cathedrals in secret chambers known only to the artist himself. A few, more cautious in their tales, suggest that Leonardo left clues hidden in plain sight, symbols carved into arches, hidden signatures in the folds of a painted robe. On certain nights, walking back to the workshop long after the taverns have emptied, you find yourself wondering how much of it is true. The pages Leonardo trusts you to carry are real enough. The diagrams, the machines, the quiet instructions written in mirrored script. But the codex, the idea of a single book holding everything, seems larger than anything you have ever seen in one place. And yet the rumor persists, as steady and certain as the tide against a dock's wooden beams. When you mention it to Leonardo, he does not look up from his work. His quill scratches across parchment, shaping the curve of a gear or the shading of a wing. Only after a long moment does he answer, voice as calm as the slow drip of oil from a candle wick. "Let them believe," he says simply. "A story spreads faster than the truth, and it lasts longer." You say nothing to that. There is nothing more to say. You have seen enough to know the line between fact and rumor is thinner than a thread drawn between two pins. And as the candlelight flickers low in the workshop, throwing long shadows across shelves stacked with parchment and tools, you realize that perhaps the truth does not matter. Whether the missing pages lie, locked in a noble's vault, burned to ash in a forgotten fire, or scattered across taverns, is nothing more than words in the dark. The legend has already taken on a life of its own. And that, in the end, is as much a part of Leonardo's legacy as any brushstroke or gear. The workshop settles into a quieter rhythm in the months after the Last Supper is complete, but that underlying sense of unfinished business never truly fades. Leonardo's surviving notebooks remain safely stacked, folded into careful bundles and sealed with simple cords, yet there is always that quiet absence lingering between them. No matter how many times you dust the shelves, no matter how many hours you spend organizing parchments by size and subject, it is impossible to ignore. Pages are missing. Not misfiled or misplaced, but missing in a way that feels permanent and deliberate, as though the walls themselves have quietly swallowed them. You carry that thought with you everywhere now. It shapes your habits without needing to be spoken aloud. When you walk through Florence's markets, eyes drift automatically to the edges of booksellers' stalls, scanning for any scrap of vellum marked in Leonardo's familiar mirrored hand. When you pass a merchant unloading a chest, you find yourself watching for any sign of folded parchment hidden beneath bolts of cloth. The search is as much a part of your daily life as mixing pigments or stretching canvas. It becomes second nature, an instinct rather than a chore. Leonardo himself does not speak of it often, but there are moments when his silence carries more weight than words ever could. You see it in the way he pauses while leafing through his remaining notebooks, fingers stopping on a blank page where a sketch once belonged, brow furrowed slightly as if trying to recall a detail lost to time. At times, he will set aside his quill mid-stroke, stare into the middle distance, and murmur something under his breath. names of lost designs, descriptions of unfinished thoughts. You know better than to interrupt him when those moments strike. They are not frustration, exactly, more like a quiet echo pulling at the edge of his memory. You both hold on to the same hope, though neither of you ever says it directly. The hope that one day, somehow, the missing pages will resurface. Perhaps a noble family, storing them in a locked room, unaware of their value. Perhaps a monastery tucking them into archives long since forgotten. Perhaps even buried beneath layers of dust in some workshop chest that was simply overlooked in the quiet chaos of daily life. The world beyond the workshop is wide enough to swallow entire books, yet it is also small enough that lost things sometimes find their way back. You make a habit of walking the quieter streets late in the afternoon, after most merchants have shuttered their stalls, and the air cools with evening. It is during these walks that you hear the most promising rumors. A sailor in a tavern, boasting that he once saw drawings marked with Da Vinci's script lining a box of spices bound for Venice. A scribe's apprentice who claims his master copied pages bearing diagrams so strange they could only belong to Leonardo. You listen to all of it, storing each detail in the back of your mind, sorting the likely from the impossible. Not all of these stories are useful. Some drift into outright fantasy. Talk of flying machines hidden in mountaintop caves, of notebooks sealed with gold leaf that can only be opened under moonlight. Yet even the most unlikely rumors hold a kernel of something real. You have carried too many of Leonardo's papers yourself to dismiss such things entirely. Sometimes, late at night, when the workshop is quiet, except for the soft rustle of parchment and the steady drip of water from the rain barrel, you find yourself sitting with the surviving notebooks laid out before you. Carefully, deliberately, you turn each page, committing its contents to memory. Drawings of wings and deers. Cross-sections of the human form rendered with unnerving clarity. Bridge designs as graceful as arches cut into the sky. And between these complete pages, the empty spaces feel sharper, like missing teeth in an otherwise perfect row. Leonardo often joins you in these late hours, moving with quiet steps from table to shelf, from window to workbench. Once, as you both sit in silence, he speaks softly without looking up from his work. "They're still out there," he says simply. "Somewhere." You do not need to ask what he means. You answer only with a nod, your hand resting lightly on the spine of a half-filled folio. The feeling is not always heavy. There is a kind of quiet steadiness in it. Knowing there is still something to be found gives shape to the days. It colors each small discovery, a scrap of parchment found folded behind a painting, a diagram tucked between the pages of an unrelated book. Each fragment feels like the start of a thread waiting to be pulled, unraveling a larger tapestry hidden just beyond sight. Florence's back rooms and locked chests are not the only places you search. Milan holds its own corners worth watching. Libraries tucked beneath noble estates, scribes' workshops known only by word of mouth. You make acquaintances in these places, always careful, always quiet. You learn which merchants deal in old papers, which abbots are willing to let you glance through dusty shelves under the guise of copying scripture. Over time, you build a map in your mind, not of streets or buildings, but of possibilities. Places where the missing pages might reappear. Names of men who might one day bring them to you, not even knowing what they carry. There are quieter, more private moments as well. Times when Leonardo sits by the window, light slanting across his face, and you see in his expression something like a quiet reckoning, not grief, not even frustration, just a steady acceptance that some things may always remain out of reach. But within that acceptance, there is always a flicker of hope. It is not the loud kind. It does not speak in grand pronouncements. It simply waits, steady and patient. And so the rhythm continues, mixing paints, stretching canvas, carrying notebooks between cities, and always, quietly, looking. Years pass, and the faces in the taverns change. Merchants' names shift. Soldiers' stories grow wilder. But the question remains the same. Where are the missing pages? You find yourself asking it, even in your sleep sometimes. Dreams filled with shadowed libraries and locked rooms, with scrolls tumbling from shelves like autumn leaves. In those dreams, you always find them, laid out in perfect rows, every line exactly as you remember, every drawing sharp and clear as morning light through stained glass. When you wake, the dream fades. But the quiet hope does not. There is no dramatic ending to the search. No sudden discovery that ties everything together in a single perfect moment. Instead, there is only the steady, lifelong rhythm of looking. The patient belief that somewhere, in some quiet room, a page waits folded and forgotten, holding the curve of a wing, the shape of a bridge, the secret of a machine yet to be built. And while your feet carry you through the streets of Florence and Milan, through taverns and workshops and noble halls, another journey waits beyond even that, a world far removed from scrolls and sketches. A world where golden ceilings and painted halls hide quieter stories of their own. Because after all the searching, after all the quiet hope, there is still one more place where history waits to be unfolded: the palaces of the Medici. There is a distinct stillness in waking beneath the painted ceilings of a Medici palace. A kind of quiet that feels deeper than anything in a workshop or monastery hall. It is not simply silence as the absence of noise. It is silence shaped by marble floors and frescoed walls, by the heavy weight of velvet curtains pulled tight against morning light. The first breath you take upon stirring is not tinged with pigment dust or the faint scent of oil and parchment, but with cool stone air, laced faintly with beeswax polish, and a lingering trace of dried herbs kept in carved wooden bowls along the window ledges. You wake slowly, stretched out on a low bed, carved from dark walnut, the kind reserved not for noblemen themselves, but for those serving within their walls. Your place is neither guest nor servant exactly, somewhere in between, close enough to be trusted with valuable things, far enough to remain unseen during formal processions. Above you, the ceiling stretches in arching curves, painted with layers of delicate blue and gold. Scenes from ancient myths, gods scattering clouds, winged horses frozen mid-flight, so finely rendered that for a moment, half awake, it feels as though the figures might shift against the sky-painted plaster. You rise carefully, the floor cool beneath bare feet, and move through the quiet chamber toward the tall windows, now catching the first pale stripes of dawn. Outside, Florence's rooftops sprawl in quiet silhouette, terracotta tiles glowing faintly beneath the soft light. The bells of Santa Maria del Fiore have not yet begun their slow call, and for these few moments, the city belongs only to you and the faint stir of wind slipping through half-open shutters. The Medici Palace does not wake all at once. It stirs in layers, like a sleeping giant rousing from slumber. In the kitchens below, fires are kindled in deep brick hearths. You catch the first scent of baking bread, drifting upward through hidden stone flues, mingling with the sharpness of rosemary and smoke. Down the marble corridors, the shuffle of slippered feet begins as servants move quietly through their morning duties, lighting candles where sunlight has not yet reached, drawing fresh water from deep stone wells beneath the courtyard. Your own duties in this place are quiet and specific. You are here not as a painter or an artist's apprentice, but as a caretaker of something smaller and more delicate, the bundles of notes and sketches Leonardo has entrusted to you, now stored within the palace's private library, locked away in a room known to only a handful of men, not on public display, not offered as curiosities to passing visitors, hidden behind carved walnut doors sealed with brass locks and watched by guards, whose faces remain as still and unreadable as the marble statues standing in the great hall below. You wash your face in a copper basin, pulling on your tunic and leather belt with practiced ease. The brush of fabric against skin feels lighter here, the linen finer, the stitching more deliberate. Even the plainest garments within these walls carry a weight of wealth. As you dress, you glance once more toward the ceiling, where painted horses remain, forever galloping across cloud-streaked blue. The artistry reminds you faintly of Leonardo's lighter studies, sketches of flight and motion, of wings pinned delicately in mid-curve. Yet here, the art is frozen in place, decorative rather than exploratory. Beautiful, but without the restless searching you have come to associate with the maestro's hand. Once ready, you step into the corridor, boots making only the faintest whisper against the polished floor. The halls are lined with statues and painted panels, each more elaborate than the last. Scenes of triumph and history, of gods and mortals, of allegories too finely woven to unravel in a single glance. Every corner holds another hidden story, a face carved in relief, a scene tucked into the corner of a ceiling fresco. Even after weeks spent walking these halls, you find new details each morning. The palace's outer windows open onto gardens, still damp with early dew. Stepping through a side door, you walk for a time along gravel paths, bordered by cypress trees and stone fountains carved in spirals. Birds stir quietly in the branches. A gardener works nearby, trimming vines with slow, deliberate movements. He does not speak as you pass, merely nodding once, as if acknowledging some unspoken rule of silence in these early hours. Your path always leads to the library. It stands in a quieter wing of the palace, far from the formal reception halls and banquet rooms. Here, the floors are simpler, the walls less adorned. It is a place for thought rather than display. You pass through two sets of carved doors, offering quiet greetings to the guards standing watch. Inside, the library stretches not in grandeur, but in quiet order, shelves of walnut lined with volumes bound in pale leather and dark green cloth, scrolls stored in compartments shaped like honeycombs. The room holds a smell you have come to know, as well as oil and pigment, vellum, ink, and aged wood. Within these walls, Leonardo's notebooks rest among tomes of philosophy and mathematics, carefully folded into bundles wrapped in linen cloth. You check on them each morning as part of your quiet routine, ensuring no pages have shifted, no seals broken. The locks remain firm, the wax seals unbroken. Yet even here, even with the guards and the brass locks and the endless quiet, you carry the same quiet habit, checking twice, always checking twice. There is a stillness in that task that echoes the stillness of waking beneath painted ceilings. It feels larger than you, less like guarding a set of papers, more like tending a living thing. Knowledge wrapped in linen, memory folded into lines of mirrored script and precise diagrams. When the morning light finally reaches the highest windows, catching dust in golden beams, you stand once more at the center of the library, breathing in the quiet air. You think of the missing pages, of the ones that are not here, the ones still waiting somewhere beyond these walls. And while this palace holds its quiet wealth, its painted ceilings and polished stone floors, you know there's a different kind of story hidden beneath the surface. A quieter one. Less about grand halls and more about the delicate line between order and chaos, art and secrecy. As the day's work begins in earnest beyond the library's doors, as footsteps grow louder and voices rise in formal greetings down the marble halls, you turn once more to the locked cabinet, pressing your hand lightly against its surface. A silent promise to the pages within, and to the ones still waiting to be found. Because as golden as these ceilings may be, the real weight of history is carried in paper and ink, folded quietly in the hands of those few trusted to carry it forward. Once the quiet of the early morning fades and the palace fully stirs to life, a different rhythm takes hold. Where before there was silence in shadowed halls, now there is motion, footsteps echoing across marble floors, the faint clink of silver against porcelain, and the low murmur of voices drifting from room to room like a slow-moving tide. It is not a sudden transformation, but rather a steady layering, First the kitchen servants, then the stewards and scribes, and finally, the nobles themselves emerging from their private chambers, each wrapped in fabrics dyed in deep jewel tones and trimmed with fur or gold thread. You join this quiet procession not as a guest of rank, nor as one of the household staff, but as something in between, a quiet observer granted access through Leonardo's standing with the Medici family. Your duties may tie you more to parchment and pigment than to the day's social arrangements, but in a place like this, every face in the hall carries a kind of weight, and it would not do to stay hidden away while the household assembles. Breakfast in the Medici palace does not unfold like the hasty, practical meals of a workshop. There is no simple bowl of porridge eaten while mixing colors or scraps of bread snatched between tasks. Here, the morning meal stretches long and slow, laid out in rooms so richly adorned, they feel more like quiet stages set for a play than places meant for everyday living. You enter the main hall just as the first trays of food are carried in, borne by servants in dark liveries, edged with the Medici crest. The hall itself is a cavern of pale stone and gold, vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of triumph and harvest. The walls lined with carved panels so detailed, they seem almost to pulse with life when the light strikes them just so. Long wooden tables stretch beneath these decorations, their surfaces covered with white linen cloth, silver dishes arranged in careful rows. You take your usual place toward the edge of the room, seated among those who serve but hold particular standing. The scribes, the architects, the favored artists and mathematicians brought in to consult on this project or that. It is not the place of the dukes and duchesses themselves, nor the cardinals who occasionally grace these tables, but it is close enough to watch and listen. The meal itself is a quiet display of wealth. Bowls of preserved fruit glisten like jewels, figs soaked in honey, slices of quince and pear arranged in delicate spirals. Loaves of bread still warm from the oven are brought in baskets lined with cloth, the scent of yeast and smoke mingling with the sharper edge of aged cheese laid out beside them. Dishes of olives and spiced meats appear next, alongside tall jugs of watered wine poured into simple but finely crafted cups. Around you, conversations drift with a particular tone, never rushed, never truly private, always layered with careful turns of phrase. It is here, over slices of honeyed bread and quiet sips of wine, that the real politics of the palace unfold. Formal councils may be held behind closed doors, but the rumors and decisions shaping Florence's path often begin at this table, murmured between bites of pear and soft curls of cheese. You listen more than you speak, as is your habit. Around you, the Medici courtiers trade comments on everything from the latest shipment of silk from Venice to the performance of a sculptor's newest commission. Names rise and fall with the same casual weight as ingredients in a recipe. One moment, they discuss the repair of city walls damaged in a recent storm. The next, they are debating the merits of a new painter rumored to have arrived from Siena, his technique said to rival da Vinci's own. Occasionally, Leonardo's name surfaces, always in that particular tone reserved for figures, both admired and considered a touch dangerous, half praise, half wariness. You catch snippets as you chew slowly through a slice of fig and bread, head bowed as if entirely occupied with the meal. They say he builds machines now for the Duke, not merely paintings. He's studied the human body in ways the church may not approve. There's talk of a mural, larger even than the Last Supper. You say nothing, but your ears sharpen at these moments. Much like the tavern whispers, these courtly murmurs carry truth and fiction in equal measure. The difference is that here, the stakes are larger. Decisions made over breakfast among the Medici can shape the course of entire cities. A name spoken too loudly, or in the wrong context, can shift favor and fortune with quiet, deliberate force. Once, while reaching for a dish of honey-soaked almonds, you find yourself seated closer than usual to one of the senior advisors, a man with silver hair bound back with a black ribbon, known for his influence. over banking decisions as much as for his taste in art. His voice lowers as he speaks to a nobleman across the table. And though you do not mean to eavesdrop, his words are too deliberate to ignore. "There are pages missing," he says quietly, slicing a fig with the tip of a small silver knife. "From Da Vinci's records. Not just sketches, notes, designs of importance." The nobleman frowns slightly, glancing toward his cup. "And how would you know this?" The advisor smiles faintly, not answering directly. But the meaning hangs in the air. You do not interrupt, but you carry that sentence with you for the rest of the meal, turning it over in your mind like a polished stone. Even here, among wealth and gold, the same questions echo. The missing pages are not forgotten. They live in rumor and quiet speculation, passed from one careful mouth to another. The meal continues in its slow, deliberate pace. Between courses, servants replace plates with quiet efficiency, removing empty dishes and setting down fresh baskets of bread and pots of honey. In the pauses between service, the court musicians take up their instruments, lutes and viols, playing soft, intricate melodies that weave beneath the rise and fall of conversation. You find these mornings both soothing and exhausting in equal measure. There is a calm to the steady flow of food and quiet music, to the gentle heat of wine and honeyed fruit. Yet beneath it all lies a constant undercurrent of careful thought. Every word heard, every name spoken, each glance traded across the table adds another layer to the quiet puzzle you carry alongside your other duties. As the final course is cleared, small candied nuts and thin slices of spiced cake, you rise with the others, offering the quiet nods expected of your station. The hall empties slowly, nobles drifting away to their morning business, servants moving swiftly to reset the tables for whatever comes next. You step back into the marble corridors, returning once more to the quieter parts of the palace where the real work waits. But even as you walk, you carry the echoes of breakfast with you, the murmurs about Leonardo's name, the advisor's quiet remark about the missing pages. It all folds into the same steady thread, woven through your days like the pattern in a brocade. And while Florence shines beneath gold ceilings and polished stone, while silks flutter in the breeze along the noble balconies, you know the heart of the story lies elsewhere, not only in the wealth displayed at table, but in the quiet work of keeping those hidden pages safe. Because beneath all the painted ceilings, behind all the gilded halls, the true weight of the Renaissance beats quietly in paper and ink, waiting for the right hands to find it again. In the world of Florence, few gatherings carried the same quiet weight as a Medici art commission. It was never merely about paint and marble or the mechanics of gilded frames. It was a matter of measured power, layered in silks and spoken in carefully chosen words rather than brushstrokes. For Leonardo, and for you by quiet extension, being involved in such commissions meant stepping into a space that balanced art, politics, and something even subtler. The expectation that every creation carried a shadow larger than itself, woven into the fabric of the city's ambitions. The morning of such a commission was always unmistakably different from ordinary palace days. From the moment you awoke beneath the painted ceilings of your quiet guest quarters, the air felt sharper, tinged with a kind of polished tension. The halls smelled not just of wood polish and incense, but of fresh-cut greenery brought in to decorate the audience rooms, woven into garlands around marble columns and draped along balustrades. Servants moved more briskly than usual, their footsteps echoing in steady rhythm as they carried trays of polished silver, parchment scrolls, and long bolts of fabric. Your own preparations followed a practiced simplicity. Plain wool tunic brushed free of dust, boots newly cleaned, cloak fastened smoothly across your chest. There were no extravagant colors or embellishments, no need to draw attention. Your place was not among the nobles, but among the artists and their keepers, close enough to listen, distant enough to vanish when needed. Once dressed, you made your way through the already stirring palace, passing quiet courtyards where early sunlight touched the tops of olive trees and glanced off stone fountains worn smooth by centuries of use. The audience room chosen for the commission was one of the grander halls, but not the grandest. Its scale deliberate rather than ostentatious. High ceilings stretched in painted beams, each gilded and traced with intricate patterns of blue and vermilion. Along the walls, frescoes from earlier centuries depicted scenes from Florence's storied past. Battles won, treaties signed, mythologies reinterpreted to flatter the Medici's sense of eternal presence. A long table of polished walnut dominated the center of the room, its surface gleaming beneath the sunlight filtering through tall arched windows. By the time you arrived, figures were already gathering around the edges of the hall. Advisors in deep green and rust-red robes murmured to one another, parchment scrolls tucked beneath their arms. Artists waited as well, some standing stiff-backed beside their assistants, portfolios clutched tightly in hand. There was no open conversation between them, only the occasional nod of recognition, a glance exchanged beneath furrowed brows. Each man measured the others in silence, calculating both standing and likelihood. You found your usual place along the perimeter of the room, positioned where you could hear without drawing undue attention. From here, you observed everything. The precise way the Medici steward entered, bearing the day's agenda sealed with a red wax stamp. The careful arrangement of chairs for the family members overseeing the commission. The quiet tension in the way servants moved, setting pitchers of water and small dishes of candied fruits along the side tables without disturbing the central focus. When the session began, it did so not with trumpets or announcements, but with a quiet gathering. Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco himself entered last, robed in deep blue lined with subtle gold thread, taking his place at the head of the table with the unhurried gravity of a man who needed no reminders of his authority. Around him sat a handful of key advisors, men known for their influence in banking, trade, and civic planning. These were not men to whom art was merely decoration. They understood its role as public statement and silent power alike. The steward unrolled the first scroll, reading aloud the proposed commission. This was not a mere fresco for a private chapel or a small household shrine. It was for one of Florence's newly restored public chapels, a space meant to blend sacred story with civic pride, blending biblical scenes with Florentine history in seamless visual form. The scale of it demanded not only skill, but vision, patience, and most importantly to those gathered, reliability. As the steward spoke, the assembled men listened in silence, their faces unreadable beneath layers of careful composure. When the reading ended, the names of artists under consideration were spoken next, beginning with those lesser known, before rising through the ranks. Leonardo's name came midway through the list, and though his physical presence was not required today, his reputation filled the room as tangibly as any frescoed wall. There was no applause, no overt sign of recognition when his name was mentioned, only the quiet weight of attention sharpening in the air. You saw it in the way several advisors leaned subtly forward, their hands folding together more tightly atop the table. One or two nobles shifted their posture slightly, as if aligning themselves with the weight of the name, even before discussion began. Following this, the artists were presented one by one, each bringing forth their proposed designs. The first stepped forward with careful dignity, unrolling long sheets of parchment across the table's surface. His sketches depicted strong figures in well-balanced arrangements, saints and soldiers, city walls rising in careful perspective. As he spoke, his voice remained calm, outlining his method, choice of pigments, required time, anticipated cost. The Medici advisors listened with expressions that shifted only minutely. One tapped a gloved finger lightly against the table's edge. Another made a small note upon a scrap of parchment, the sound of quill scratching nearly lost beneath the painter's steady explanation. When he stepped back, the next artist approached, repeating the ritual. Sketches unrolled, methods described, estimates offered. And then came Leonardo's representative, a figure from his workshop you recognized, an older assistant trusted with matters of delicate presentation. He carried not loose scrolls, but a single-bound folio, its cover of dark leather, marked with Leonardo's characteristic seal. The folio was laid open across the table, its pages turned slowly by the assistant's careful hand. From your position at the room's edge, you could not see every line, but the shifting silence in the hall told you enough. The faces of those seated at the table softened slightly as they leaned closer, drawn in by the precision Leonardo's work always carried. Figures that moved with unforced grace, structures rendered in perfect proportion, not just as art, but as engineered reality. Yet with that recognition came caution. You could feel it in the careful pauses between comments, in the understated glances exchanged between advisors. Leonardo's genius was known, but so too was his tendency toward deliberate slowness, his refusal to sacrifice perfection for speed. One noble spoke first, voice measured and deliberate. Maestro da Vinci's technique is without equal. Yet we must weigh reliability. Another replied smoothly, innovation carries its own risk, but its own reward as well. No one spoke too quickly or too loudly. This was not a debate in the usual sense, but a negotiation performed through silence as much as words. By midday, the hall was warm with candlelight and angled beams of sun cutting golden lines across the polished floor. When final considerations were made, they were spoken quietly by the steward as he approached each artist, offering a word in passing, confirmation or gentle refusal. You watched as Leonardo's assistant received a simple nod, nothing more, but it was enough. The Medici had chosen. Another great commission added to the maestro's already towering legacy. As the hall began to empty, you remained in place a moment longer, watching the subtle movements of the Medici nobles as they withdrew, not in haste, but with the deliberate calm of men who had, once again, shaped the city's future with nothing more than parchment, ink, and quiet words. And as you stepped back into the quieter corridors beyond the audience room, you carried the steady knowledge that this commission, like all things tied to Leonardo, would unfold slowly, and with layered consequence, not only in frescoed walls and gilded frames, but in the quiet, lasting influence of work done carefully, deliberately, and without rushing to meet the moment before it was ready. Life within a Medici palace, for all its silks and painted ceilings, is not as serene as the polished marble floors and fragrant herb gardens might suggest. Beneath the layers of art and wealth, there is always something quieter moving. A current of tension, soft but constant, like water flowing unseen beneath a city street. It is not only political intrigues whispered behind tapestries or alliances woven in the shade of archways. It is the quieter, more personal dangers, the things no steward or nobleman will speak of aloud, but which every person living under such a roof comes to recognize sooner or later. For you, those dangers often take a specific shape. The threat to Leonardo's notes, to the drawings and inventions that have already attracted too many curious eyes. It is not simply a matter of guarding parchment behind locked doors or carrying it beneath your cloak while traveling between cities. The danger inside these walls feels different, heavier somehow. It moves in silences that stretch too long between conversations, in the way a servant lingers just a little too long near a library door, in the slight shift of a guard's gaze when he should be staring straight ahead. You first notice it not during any grand event, but in the quiet rhythm of your daily duties. One morning, while checking the locked cabinets in the palace library where Leonardo's remaining notebooks are stored, you find a faint mark along the edge of the wood, a scrape so thin it might be mistaken for ordinary wear. But the shape of it, a deliberate narrow line running parallel to the lock, tells you it is no accident. Someone has tested the cabinet's strength, not opened it, not yet, but measured it, gauged its resistance. You say nothing aloud, not at first. Instead, you begin watching more carefully. You change your routine slightly each day. checking the locks earlier or later, walking different corridors on your way to the library. You take note of which faces pass you in the hallways and which linger in places where there is no need to linger. It does not take long to identify patterns. A servant with sharp eyes who always seems to be dusting near the library door. A clerk whose errands carry him too often past the Medici archives. Neither man would draw attention in a lesser household. But here, in this layered world where knowledge and power walk hand in hand, they stand out like mismatched brushstrokes on a master's canvas. One evening, as shadows stretch long across the palace courtyard, and the air cools with the scent of lavender from the garden beds, you take a deliberate walk through the lesser-used halls. You carry no parchment that night, no folded notebooks, only yourself and the quiet weight of observation. The halls are quieter here. No nobles passing through, only the occasional flicker of a servant's lantern far down some turning corridor. It is here, along the back corridor leading toward the library's rear wall, that you catch the faintest sound, the soft scrape of wood on stone, too deliberate to be mistaken for wind or wandering cat. You pause in the shadows, body still, breath caught in your throat. The sound comes again. You step forward quietly, boots making no sound against the polished floor. Turning the corner, you find what you expected. One of the minor clerks crouched near a cabinet that holds not books, but the keys to more important rooms. He rises too quickly when he sees you, offering a smile too thin, too sharp. "Lost my way," he murmurs, eyes flicking sideways like a man measuring the distance to the nearest exit. You do not smile in return. You only meet his gaze steadily, saying nothing. After a long pause, he bows slightly, murmuring an apology, and slips away down the hall. You follow him with your eyes until he vanishes around the far corner, then turn your attention to the cabinet itself. It is unharmed for now, but the message is clear. From that evening forward, you change more than your own habits. You speak quietly with the steward responsible for household security, ensuring that the guards posted nearest to the library carry a new set of instructions. You arrange for the locks to be changed, silently, without public notice, replacing brass with steel, switching keys between keepers every 3 days. Leonardo is informed of all of this in brief, measured words. He nods as he listens, face calm as always, though you see in the tight line of his mouth that none of this surprises him. "There are always watchers," he says simply. "Always hands reaching for what they do not understand. The dangers are not always confined to parchment and locks. There are subtler risks as well. Words spoken in the wrong ear, alliances shifting beneath your feet. During formal dinners and quiet gatherings, you keep watch over the conversation as much as over the room. You learn to listen not only for what is said, but for what is not. A name absent from a list of acknowledgments. A patron's polite refusal where once there was eager support. It is during one such gathering, a quiet supper hosted in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms, that you witness a quieter form of danger unfold. A nobleman, well known for his patronage of lesser painters, leans too close to one of the Medici advisors, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial hush. You catch only a few words as you pass nearby, enough to understand the shape of the thing. Designs hidden in plain sight, worth more than you do not interrupt. You simply file it away. Later, in the privacy of your own quarters, you recount it to Leonardo, who listens with his usual calm, lips pressed into a thoughtful line. "There will always be those who believe possession is the same as understanding," he says quietly. "Let them try." The palace holds its silences as tightly as its gold. Days pass with no outward sign of change, yet beneath that calm surface, you feel the tension coil tighter. Locks checked more frequently. Guards stationed with quieter precision. And always, you carry your own measures. Papers folded not in single layers, but in doubles. False folios prepared with meaningless sketches meant to confuse the too curious. There is no final confrontation. No single moment where danger bursts into the open. It remains, as all things in the Medici world do, woven into the quiet fabric of daily life. A whisper here, a glance there, shadows in corridors where there should be none. And yet, through all of it, the work continues. Leonardo's pages, both those known and those missing, remain as they always have, protected not only by locks and keys, but by the steady, deliberate vigilance of those who understand their true weight. As you stand once more in the palace library, watching golden afternoon light spill across the shelves, you know the dangers have not passed, but they are managed, shaped, kept at bay. And while Florence continues its quiet, gilded life beyond these walls, another rhythm waits quietly beyond it, still the steady hum of the city outside the palace gates, where the influence of Medici wealth meets the lives of those living in its shadow. Evening falls slowly over the Medici palace, not as a sudden descent into darkness, but as a quiet shift in color and sound. The sky beyond the tall windows deepens from pale gold into soft lavender, then into the dark indigo of night. The last rays of sunlight catch along the gilded cornices and painted ceilings, making them glow faintly before surrendering to the warm flicker of candlelight and oil lamps. Tonight is not a night for quiet work or private meetings. Tonight, the palace hosts one of its more refined pleasures, an evening banquet, not for nobles and ambassadors alone, but for artists and poets, sculptors and architects, gathered in one place to speak, to eat, and to weave their quiet influence into Florence's broader story. You are not here as a guest of honor. Your place remains as it always does, quiet, observant, useful. Yet you are close enough to the heart of things to watch it unfold, to feel the shape of the evening stretch and deepen as course after course is served, and conversation drifts between the practical and the philosophical. The banquet hall itself is not the grandest in the palace, though it is grand enough. Long tables draped in pale linen stretch beneath a ceiling frescoed with scenes of Apollo and the Muses. Bronze candelabras flicker along the walls, their soft light catching on polished silver and deep green glazed pottery filled with olives and fruits. The air carries the scent of roasted meats, honeyed almonds, and the sharper note of preserved lemons and spiced wine. By the time you take your place near the far end of the hall, among other assistants, scribes, and lesser patrons, the room is already alive with sound. Laughter rings softly beneath the deeper murmur of conversation. The sharp tap of a wine cup against a table punctuates a point made during some quiet debate. There is music, of course. A quartet of lutes and viols set off in a recessed alcove, playing a steady pulse of melody that does not interrupt, but rather floats beneath the rhythm of words. Tonight's guests are not simply gathered for celebration. There is purpose behind the arrangement. Lorenzo de Medici himself, though seated apart at the head of the table, has curated the gathering deliberately, bringing together painters, sculptors, philosophers, and poets whose names already shape the walls of Florence's most important halls. At one corner, you catch sight of Sandro Botticelli, speaking with quiet intensity to a younger painter whose name you do not yet know. At another, a poet recites half-formed verses under his breath, while sketching new lines onto the back of a folded letter. Architects sketch rough columns on spare scraps of vellum, arguing softly over ratios and arches, their voices rising and falling in a pattern as steady as the music. Between them move servants in dark livery, carrying dishes that appear in steady waves. First come bowls of olives and nuts, small plates of pickled vegetables. Then heavier fare, roasted capons glazed with honey, whole fish wrapped in herbs and cooked in oil, baskets of bread still warm from the ovens. Wine flows constantly, poured into crystal cups or heavy clay vessels, depending on rank and mood. No glass is ever left empty for long, and no plate sits bare before being replaced with another. You eat slowly, carefully, not to draw attention, but your focus remains on the conversations unfolding around you. This is not simply an evening for enjoyment. It is, as all things in the Medici world are, an evening shaped by quiet business and layered influence. You listen to one architect discussing a planned addition to Santa Maria Novella, his voice dipping into quieter tones as he speaks of which patron's approval is needed and which noble's favor must first be secured. You hear a sculptor speak of marble quarries near Carrara, arguing over whose workshop will gain first claim to the season's best stones. Leonardo's name surfaces here as well, as it always does, half in admiration, half in speculation. You hear it from the mouth of a poet seated further up the table, his words rolling slowly, as though savoring each one like a sip of aged wine. Da Vinci, the poet says, voice warm and deliberate. The man is a painter, yes, but also a philosopher, a man of machines. I wonder, does Florence hold him tightly enough? Or will Milan call him away for good? There is a murmur of agreement and debate in response. You listen without comment, knowing full well that Leonardo's attention is rarely held by any city for long, that his loyalties move like the very gears and pulleys he sketches onto parchment late at night. As the evening stretches onward, the atmosphere softens further. The first sharp edges of formality relax beneath the steady tide of wine and music. Laughter rises more freely now. Gestures grow broader, voices louder. But beneath that ease, the same careful currents continue. Every word spoken carries weight. Every compliment paid or insult offered, even in jest, shapes some future commission, some future favor to be asked or withheld. At one point, you rise quietly from your place, weaving between servants and courtiers to carry a sealed note from one of Leonardo's associates to a steward near the head table. The message is simple, but the act places you briefly near the center of the gathering. From this vantage point, you catch clearer glimpses of faces usually seen only from a distance. Lorenzo de' Medici leaning back slightly in his chair, listening intently as a philosopher sketches a diagram onto the tablecloth with the tip of a wet finger. An elderly painter tracing invisible lines in the air as he argues the virtues of curved perspective against strict linear form. You deliver the note, bow slightly, and step back once more, returning to your quieter place. Yet the echoes of those closer observations stay with you. They offer quiet confirmation of something you have long known, but always feel freshly when standing in such rooms, that power in Florence is not carried in swords or gold alone. It is carried in ideas, in paintings and poems, in inventions half completed, and in frescoes half dreamed. And here, in this hall, lit by golden candlelight and gilded frames, where artists and poets argue gently over form and color, the future of that power is shaped as deliberately as pigment layered onto plaster. As the final courses are served, sugared fruits, thin slices of candied orange peel, small cakes flavored with honey and lavender, the music shifts into slower melodies. A kind of winding down begins, as deliberate as the meal's opening. No one rises all at once. It is a slow dispersal, layered in quiet goodbyes and murmured promises of future meetings. You remain until nearly the last of the guests have departed, watching as chairs are pushed back, as servants begin clearing the tables, gathering dishes, and wiping away crumbs with soft cloths. When you finally step back into the cooler night air, outside the banquet hall, the sky is thick with stars, and Florence's rooftops stretch in quiet silhouette against the horizon. The streets are quieter now, save for the occasional bell chiming the hour from a distant tower, or the soft tread of guards making their rounds. You walk slowly, feeling the weight of the evening settle not as exhaustion, but as a kind of steady satisfaction. These banquets are not simply events to be survived or observed. They are part of the larger rhythm, a careful dance of patronage and creation, influence and silence. And though Leonardo himself may not have been seated at the table tonight, his presence was woven through it as surely as the music and candlelight. You return to the quieter quarters of the palace, passing once more beneath painted ceilings and along marble halls. And as you close the door behind you, the flickering torchlight along the walls casts soft golden shadows against the wood. Tomorrow will bring more work, more pages to protect, more rumors to sift through. But for tonight, you allow yourself a single quiet moment, standing in the hush of your chamber, letting the echoes of lute strings and quiet voices fade into the silence. By the time the final echoes of footsteps fade and the last low voices fall silent, the Medici Palace stands wrapped in a calm unlike anything seen during its bustling daylight hours. It is not the abrupt quiet of a city falling suddenly asleep, but rather a deliberate slowing, each sound thinning and stretching, until all that remains is the steady whisper of the night breeze against stone walls and the muted crackle of the last candle flames burning low in their sconces. You move through the darkened halls one last time, boots softened against polished marble floors, each step carrying you further from the grand banquet rooms now cleared of silver and linen, away from the libraries with their locked chests and carefully folded notebooks, toward the smaller, plainer guest quarters, tucked beneath the palace's eastern wing. The air cools as you walk, no longer heavy with the scent of roasted meats and spiced wine, but edged instead with something simpler beeswax polish. Stone warmed faintly by the day's sun, and the faintest trace of lavender from sachets placed in the window niches to keep moths at bay. Candlelight flickers along the corridor walls, thinner now, casting long ribbons of gold that stretch and waver as you pass. No servants remain bustling at this hour. The halls are left to their own quiet presence, shaped by shadows and softened by distance. When you reach your room, it is exactly as you left it, neat, cool, and still. A single lamp burns low near the bed, its flame enclosed in glass, casting a steady pool of amber light across the dark wood of the writing desk and the smooth linen of the turned-back sheets. You undress slowly, fingers moving with the quiet efficiency that comes only from long habit, folding your tunic and cloak with deliberate care, placing your boots beneath the chair by the window, smoothing each fold so nothing feels left out of place. Each small task helps ease the final edge of wakefulness from your thoughts, pulling you gently towards sleep without forcing it. Outside the shuttered window, Florence lies quiet beneath the stars. The city's usual hum, vendors calling, bells ringing, carts rumbling over cobblestone streets, has long since faded. Now there is only the faint murmur of wind stirring through cypress trees. Perhaps a single dog barking far in the distance, but nothing more. Even the great dome of Santa Maria del Fiore, visible from certain palace windows during the day, now looms as a silent shadow against the deeper darkness of the sky. You sit for a moment at the edge of the bed, letting the cool linen brush against your fingertips, allowing your body to catch up with the stillness around you. The day has been long, shaped by quiet work and layered conversation. The weight of Leonardo's commissions balanced against the quiet knowledge of his missing pages, the careful weaving of social threads at the banquet table. It all feels farther away now, like scenes from a fresco seen from the other end of a long hall, recognizable but softened by distance. When you finally lie back, stretching fully along the length of the bed, there is a faint creak from the wooden frame beneath you. The mattress is firm, stuffed with wool rather than feathers, but after months spent moving between rougher quarters, apprentices' bunks, cold monastery cells, it feels generous. The linen sheet is cool at first, but as you pull it up across your chest, its warmth begins to gather slowly, matching the even rise and fall of your breath. Above you, the ceiling is plain wood beams crossed with supporting arches. Nothing gilded, nothing frescoed, not like the grand halls above. And yet, as you watch the candle's faint glow flicker against the grain of the wood, there is a certain peace in the simplicity. It allows your thoughts to drift more freely, to wander without sharp corners or sudden intrusions. You find yourself thinking once more of Leonardo's notebooks, sealed away in the palace library, the ones accounted for, the ones missing. Their pages float in your mind's eye, not as burdens or puzzles now, but as part of the larger pattern you have grown used to tracing. A network of knowledge, half known and half hidden, like stars scattered across a night sky where some constellations remain uncharted. And as your thoughts drift, so too does your body. Your muscles loosen, no longer carrying the quiet tension that comes from watchfulness. Your hands, which had spent the day folded in subtle care, holding parchment, adjusting wax seals, steadying the hilt of your belt knife as you walk the halls, now rest open at your sides, fingers relaxed against the cool sheet. The candle near your bed burns lower still, its wick curling into a smaller flame, flickering more than before as the last of its wax pools in the shallow dish below. Its scent, faintly sweet, edged with something sharp like rosemary, mixes with the lavender hanging from the window sash, wrapping the room in the kind of calm that does not announce itself, but simply fills the space gently, completely. From somewhere deeper in the palace, far down corridors you have not walked tonight, there may still be one or two servants finishing their last duties, folding tapestries, banking coals in stone hearths. But even those tasks feel distant now. Here in your room, there is nothing more to do. Nothing left to arrange or seal. Nothing left to guard, at least until morning. The work is finished for now. Your breath slows further. In through your nose, cool and steady. Out again through your mouth, as even as the rise and fall of tide against a stone pier. There is no rush. No final thought that demands to be answered before rest. Only the quiet shape of memory, painted walls, pages folded in linen, the low murmur of lute strings fading as the last guests left the banquet. As sleep draws nearer, your mind moves once more through the palace halls in quiet recollection, not as they were crowded with guests, but as they are now, still steady, lit only by the low glow of torches and the pale wash of starlight through high windows. You picture the library's heavy doors closed tight, the chests sealed and silent, the great audience hall standing empty beneath its gilded beams. Even the grand staircase leading to Lorenzo's private quarters feels softened by night, its steps touched not by the shuffle of noble feet, but only by the faint dust stirred by the quiet wind. Your final waking thought is not of danger or duty, but of continuity, of how these halls have stood for generations, how they will continue to stand long after the flickering candle by your bedside has burned completely to ash. The paintings will fade, the pages may be lost or found again, but the rhythm of the place endures, slow, patient, deliberate. And so, as the last ember curls into darkness, and the weight of sleep settles fully upon you, there is no resistance left in your body. Only quiet acceptance. You drift fully into rest, carried gently by the hush of stone walls, the soft brush of linen, and the silent stories folded into the very air of the Medici palace. Beyond your shuttered window, the stars continue their slow turning, unseen but steady. And within these walls, history breathes softly, not in grand proclamations, but in the quiet sleep of those who carry its weight. Now, as this long journey winds gently to its close, we'll ease into our final thoughts for tonight. No more footsteps to follow. No more pages left to turn. Just quiet now, as we let the story settle softly like dust on parchment, folding everything we've seen into calm. And that's where we'll leave it for tonight. From the cluttered work tables in Leonardo's workshop to the quiet halls where unfinished paintings rest beneath dust-covered cloth, from the echoing chambers of Medici palaces to the forgotten scrolls tucked behind library walls. A long, slow walk through the layered world of Renaissance Florence, filled with both grand commissions and quiet mysteries. If you're still awake, thanks for staying with me all the way to the end. And if you drifted off somewhere between the clatter of paintbrushes and the whispered rumors in the taverns, that's perfectly fine too. That's really the whole point of these late-night journeys. If you enjoyed this calmer, sleep-friendly dive into history, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it was when you pressed play. It's always nice to see these quiet stories reaching different corners of the world. For now, I'll let the noise of the workshops fade, the footsteps across marble floors grow quieter, and the candle flames flicker low one by one. Sleep well, and I'll see you next time.